Welcome to the sleep haunt. Let the lights fade and settle into the quiet. Out on the highway, the night stretches endlessly, and for those who patrol it, darkness often hides more than speeding cars. Tonight, we share 9 true disturbing stories from highway patrol officers, moments that linger long after the sirens fade. If you're here to drift into sleep, let the hum of the road carry you. Before we begin, drop your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I'd love to know where you're joining from. Story number 1. The eastbound lanes of Route 77 ran straight as a rig's shadow for nearly 20 miles. A ribbon of blacktop stitched into pine and marsh. The night had thinned out to distant taillights and quiet shoulders when Officer Dana Merrick rolled past mile 317. The dashboard clock said 3:17 as well, a coincidence that felt unimportant until it didn't. Dispatch had gone still. The usual alternating beeps and clipped chatter had faded. Crickets took up the space the radio left behind. The cruiser's interior was a small world of dull glow. Speedometer needle steady, dashcam lights steady, her thermos steaming in the holder. Another hour and the first hint of gray would seep along the tree line. The third tone came on the radio, low and out of place. 2 tones usually signaled a page out or a high-priority call. This arrived like a soft note under the usual pair, a small hum that slid into her ears and disappeared before she could be certain it had happened at all. She glanced at the console, half expecting a loose wire to show itself. Everything was normal. Outside, the reflectors pulsed by like metronomes. At mile 318, a hazard light blinked in the slow lane. A compact sedan sat angled a little too neatly, as if placed. It wasn't smoking, wasn't hit, wasn't being attended, just sitting with its rear flashers ticking a slow, patient rhythm. She pulled in behind it and set her own bar to yellow. The cruiser's engine idled low. A breeze moved through the pines and lifted a stray paper cup along the shoulder. Unit 12, 1097, she said on scene, even though dispatch hadn't called her to anything. Old habit, old safety net. She stepped out, and the smell of warm rubber and pine needles rose to meet her. The sedan's windows were fogged from the inside. No one in the driver's seat. She rapped on the rear window with her knuckle. The only answer was the tick-tick of the hazard lights. She peered in through her flashlight's edge. A phone cord lay coiled on the passenger seat, no phone attached. A safety vest was folded over the seatback. The keys dangled in the ignition, turned to accessory. She knew the routine. Call a tow, clear it before the dawn push. Behind her, the radio gave a soft hiss. It was nothing that could be typed on a form, just a gentle drag of sound, as though someone had let out a breath into the microphone, careful and close. She lifted her shoulder mic. Dispatch, Unit 12, disabled vehicle, eastbound near 318, no occupants visible. Silence. The hiss came again, then a firm click, like a locker door closing. She turned her head and looked along the shoulder, scanning the grass. There were footprints in the dew, but they didn't begin at the driver's door. They began in the middle of the shoulder, 3 clean ovals moving toward the tree line, then vanishing, as though the ground had decided not to take any more prints. Copy, the radio said. But it wasn't dispatch's voice. It wasn't anyone's voice, not truly. The word clicked into the speaker in her own cadence, in her own pitch, replayed from some earlier time, and set gently back into the air. It made the hairs along her forearm lift. The hazard lights stopped. They didn't fade. They simply stopped mid-blink, leaving the red lenses like dark eyes. She reached into the sedan and flicked the switch. Nothing. Tapped it. Nothing. She popped the hood. The cable had come loose from the battery. It looked neatly unhooked, as if placed aside. The third tone, soft and low, rolled through the radio again. Dana stood up slowly, the hood hovering above like a dull gray eyelid. Across the median, an arrow board glowed alive, hunkered in the gravel like a sleepy animal. It blinked a slow pattern, left, 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 urging traffic to merge. No work crew, no cones, no one to manage it. She squinted. The arrow board sat in the old way station lot, which had been closed for years. She had patrolled that mile 100 times. The padlocked gate, the cracked pavement, the old scale house with its blinds forever stuck halfway. There was no power there. There was no reason for that arrow board to be on. "Dispatch, you copy?" she asked. "Copy," her own voice answered, the radio playing it back a fraction too slow to sound right. She looked at the clock. 3:17. She hadn't moved for 5 minutes. Her breath fogged in the cooler air. She set her flares anyway, measured and neat. 150 feet behind, 125, another near the bumper. They burned with steady orange cones, and their smoke moved down the shoulder like low fog. She checked the trunk, made sure the extra triangles were ready. The habit of years calmed the twist in her stomach. Beyond her flares, something tapped the guardrail. It sounded like a coin flicked against hollow metal. Ting, 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 in a rhythm slower than a heartbeat. The sound drew along the rail and stopped where the arrow board pointed. She crossed the median once the eastbound lanes were clear and stepped through the broken part of the fence into the way station lot. The air changed there, as if the trees leaned in closer. Gravel crunched under her boots with a soft, predictable chorus. The signs panel flickered up close. It clicked as it changed, mechanical relays working in a body that should have been dead. The arrow left, left, left. Then the chevrons, then a block of amber lights that held steady a beat too long to be purely electrical. She walked around the back. A jumper cable snaked to nothing. The battery cabinet was empty. She wiped a bit of dust off the case door, and her hand came away damp. Mile marker 317. A voice said on the radio, clear as ice water. It wasn't hers. It wasn't anyone she knew. A man's voice, low and level. Stay until it passes. She glanced back to the highway. A box truck moved like a pale whale in the left lane, smooth and steady. The air was still. The voice had not been an open channel. No unit numbers. No background noise. It was as if someone had leaned across the console from the passenger seat and said it in her ear. She lifted her mic. Unit 12? Say again? Who's on this frequency? Her words floated out into nothing. The tap on the guardrail came again. Ting. On the scale house window, behind years of dust, someone had drawn a small triangle. Her flashlight found it a child's triangle, shaky, the kind people draw when they mean mountain or danger or home. Beside it, a thumbprint smear that caught the light and threw it back. It could have been from 10 years earlier. It could have been from tonight. The sound of an engine downshifting carried over the trees. She walked toward the highway, every instinct telling her to get back to her flares, to the solid answer of the disabled sedan. The arrow board clicked on its pattern. Left, left, left. Her flares burned steady. She stepped to the median and watched the surface of the road itself. It looked normal. Black and dull and blank as always. It was just a road. But sometimes roads hold drops of cold where they shouldn't. Sometimes they hold something you can't see until a vehicle commits to it. The fog lifted a little. A sheen revealed itself. A ribbon that ran across both lanes like a pale lace. It wasn't rain. Nothing fell from the sky. It was a glaze laid down by air colder than it had any right to be. She lifted the mic and spoke slow. Dispatch, eastbound at 318, possible black ice across both lanes. Advise units. I'm shutting the right lane. Her hand hovered over the siren control. She didn't want to startle the wrong driver at the wrong moment. She switched to the low, steady yelp, the one that raised hair at the right distance without startling hearts at the wrong one. Her light bar rolled from yellow to blue to bright white, a slow swirl that looked almost calm. The box truck rolled into view again, closer now, and she saw the driver's hands at 10 and 2, the shift of the vehicle as he settled his load. He took the left lane. The sheen caught his tires with a quick, cold hand. The truck slid half a foot and then caught again. He corrected. Too much. Or not enough. It was impossible to tell from this angle. The trailer whispered to itself in its links. The truck straightened. His brake lights flared red and then gentled out. He made it past the ribbon. A van behind him did not. It jerked at the sheen as if someone had tugged on its bumper. It fast-fished, then settled. All of them slowed, obedient to the light and the arrow that did not belong. She waited until nothing else moved faster than common sense. When she finally crossed back to her flares, the disabled sedan looked somehow more present, more lonely, like a chair in a room after the guests have left. On the passenger seat, The coiled phone cord had straightened. A note sat tucked under the edge of the visor, where she knew her flashlight would look. It wasn't there before. On it, a phone number and a name. T. Shale. The letters were printed in neat block capitals. The number was local, but the area code was old. The type retired when the county changed its exchanges years ago. Her radio crackled with life. Actual dispatch, crisp and awake. Unit 12, be advised. A call came in reporting a vehicle abandoned in your vicinity. Caller hung up, no callback. Payphone origin shows mile marker 317. U10, 97? Affirmative, she said. The word felt good because it wasn't her own voice answering her. No occupant. Possible weather hazard caused a slowdown. Request tow. Stand by for information. Acknowledged, dispatch said. For your information, no payphones are on that stretch. Caller ID could be a misroute. Copy. Dana walked the shoulder again. Let the beam of her light pass over the guardrail. The small tapping had ceased, replaced by the distant hiss of the freeway, opening its throat to the dawn. Out past the line of pines, a bar of pale color teased the edge of the world. The moments between 3 and 4 had finally exhaled. She lifted the note under the visor. The letters were clean, the ink fresh enough to smudge. She didn't. She called the number from the handset in the cruiser, the one the department had insisted on keeping because sometimes, radios made bargains with the world that cell towers did not. The line answered to nothing, then to a faint hum that made her press the handset closer. After a count of 5, a woman's voice came through, soft and paper-thin with distance. He said to wait, the voice said. He said you'd wait. Ma'am, this is the highway patrol. Are you safe? Safe? The woman considered it, not as a question, but like a word she hadn't had to decide on in a long time. We left the car. We walked to the scale house. He said to wait. We did. Did you listen to him? Who? The man on the radio, she said, as if that narrowed it down to one person in the entire world. The one who sounds like the road. Dana's throat went dry. Where are you now? A pause, long enough to picture a forehead pinched in thought. Past it, the woman said. Past where we were. I think we walked in a big circle and ended up on the right night anyway. The tone again, soft as a held note, hummed through the cruiser speaker in the space where the call's side tone should be. It vibrated the air in a way a song might at low volume inside a closed room. The dawn line grew another shade brighter. She thanked the caller, left a callback number, logged the tow request for the sedan. The tow arrived. A seasoned driver with coffee on his breath and a polite head tilt that said he'd been doing this long enough to know when not to talk. He hooked the sedan without a word and let its front wheels climb the cradle. He signed a paper in a steady hand. Black ice, he said, as if the road itself had signed it. Haven't seen that here in years. Yeah, lucky you were here before the morning crowd. Luck, she said. The aeroboard across the way had gone dark, leaving only the shape of itself against the old way station lot. It looked ordinary now, inert and heavy. The report took 10 minutes. In the narrative box, she typed words that fit. Disabled vehicle. Hazard mitigation. Possible ice. Tow requested. She paused over the rest. There were forms for everything except the way a voice could sit down beside a person inside a car and say the thing that kept them from moving too soon. An older sergeant had once told a story about this mile, about a winter a long time ago when an officer didn't wait. The story wasn't told for shock. It was told for the moral that every traffic stop has a clock face of its own, and it's best not to force the hands. That officer's call sign had been 12 as well. The radio had sometimes called him after he'd gone, a rumor no one wrote down. At the end of shift, when the sky had gone from pewter to the leveled-out blue of day, Dana stopped at the maintenance yard, what had been the scale house once. Through the chain link, the aeroboard sat cooling in the slanted light, a blank, big-boned thing taking up Sunday. The sign's control panel was latched with a rusted padlock that hadn't been opened in years. The battery compartment inside was empty. No wires hung. No trick circuits grinned at her. She walked the perimeter and found in the dust at the base of the window a triangle drawn by a finger through grime, the shape the light had caught. Fresh. She could tell because the edges weren't softened by time. The triangle's apex pointed at the highway. Beside it, 5 small taps had nicked the dust, the little marks a coin might make if someone pattered it against the sill. She stepped back and watched the road for a minute. Cars moved and didn't know they were being watched out of kindness. In the reflection of the window glass, her car sat like anyone's, no more important than a pickup or a sedan. The reflection held something else just for a blink. A bluish band of light, sliding gently, even though her own bar was dark. It was as if the window remembered what had been. Later, dispatch called to close the loop about the payphone. No record of a line at 317, the dispatcher said. Public Works says they pulled the last of them out 5 years back. But the system shows the call. It's stamped. Stamps can lie, Dana said. Sometimes, the dispatcher said, and didn't ask for a lesson. That week, she drove that stretch each night and listened. Around 3:17, sometimes a faint tone rose under the radio's quiet. Some nights it did not. Some nights, the road was just a road, and it gave her nothing more than the soft thump of seams under her tires and the light that moved across the dash. When the tone came, it meant very little beyond the idea that someone, somewhere, was listening at the edge of a frequency, willing to lean in just enough to be heard. When the winter finally arrived proper, with its fogs and sudden glittering patches where air met road at an argument, the arrow board flashed once more. Left, left, left. No battery. No crew. The pattern held long enough to slow a line of commuters into a careful single file. By the time anyone else could become confused or bored, the panel went dark again, and the road resumed its usual face. The calls that come from nowhere are logged like any other. The forms carry their checkboxes. The report numbers increase. The highway wears its miles and shrugs off its days. But the third tone is a thing between the lines. A small, steady reminder at that mile on that shift that the road remembers its own. And sometimes, in the thinnest hour, chooses who to shelter. On later nights, when her path took her westbound past that same stretch, she would slow slightly under the trees and glance at the old lot, the dormant sign like a sleeping dog. If the radio sighed softly in the speaker, she would glance at the time. The road would be empty ahead. She would ride the center of her lane, watch the sheen on the asphalt, and wait the extra 20 seconds a calm voice had asked her to wait. Nothing happened, and that was the point. The loudest stories often end in a quiet that nobody hears. Around mile 317, at 3, after 17, quiet had a voice, and it sounded a little like the hum of a radio that has just chosen not to break. Story number 2. The westbound stretch of Interstate 61 unspooled through scrub and low hills, a line of pale reflectors stitched into the dark. Officer April Hahn had the kind of night where the roadside felt hollowed out, where the service plazas were lit like small aquariums, and every parked rig breathed soft diesel into the cold. Her cruiser hummed beneath her, the console steady with familiar green light. No wind, no bugs in the beam. The night had the stillness of a held breath. She approached mile 244 and checked the shoulder with a casual glance. It was habit, not suspicion, the way her eyes counted broken white lines, the way she read the road like text. Dispatch was quiet aside from the occasional unit checking onto a traffic stop far from her post. She sipped lukewarm coffee and watched the time climb toward 2 in the morning. 3/4 of a mile ahead, her high beams found a sign she didn't know by memory. Exit 0, white, on green, new looking, the sheeting fresh enough that the letters seemed to float over the background. April frowned. 0? The county had renumbered interchange exits years back. She knew them like ticks on a ruler. There was no exit 0 on her beat. She blinked and scanned for the gore point where a ramp would peel away. There it was, clean as a blueprint, a gentle arc to the right with a clear, unscuffed shoulder. The reflective posts along its curve stood too straight and too bright for something unlisted. Her ALPR camera bounced a reflexive click as it read nothing at all. Her radio carried a thin hiss and then settled. She tapped the mic anyway. Dispatch, Sierra 3. Confirm westbound just after 244. Do we have new construction? I'm seeing a ramp marked exit 0. A beat. Sierra 3. Negative on any new ramp. Closest scheduled work is mile 2, 49. You need a map pull? Stand by, she said, easing off the throttle. The ramp wasn't a trick of angle. It sat there confident and ordinary, asking the same thing every ramp asked. Will you take this turn and see where it goes? A pair of taillights ahead blinked as a compact SUV hit its signal and committed. The vehicle glided toward the new signage, with the easy trust of someone following a directions app. April nudged her wheel to the right and followed, not with lights or urgency, just an officer's quiet intention to be where a motorist was about to be alone. The ramp caught her tires with a gentle change in texture. Fresher asphalt had that muted hiss. She felt the centerline's raised markers thump in a polite cadence. The sign for exit 0 slid overhead, casting a brief green wash across her dash. The SUV stayed 10 car lengths ahead, steady and calm. April could see the driver's head turn to check mirrors, a small, square silhouette. The ramp curved out of her known map and into a short connector road that ducked under the highway. New guardrail, new shoulder paint, no litter, no weeds pushing at the seams. The SUV's brake lights flared once and then eased. The connector rose. A billboard hunkered on its steel legs just beyond the merge point. Cutler's Pecans. Family. Owned since 1978. With a smiling cartoon squirrel hoisting a sack of nuts. The phone number on the corner was written in tall digits that were all wrong for current area codes. April's brain made 2 notes at once. One to laugh about the squirrel later, one to call Dot about an out-of-compliance sign. The connector flowed into an at-grade road that felt like an older highway. 2 lanes, a painted median that might have been crimson once. April followed the SUV 100 more yards and saw the same billboard again. Same squirrel, same phone number, same tiny tear in the fabric at the corner where wind had nipped it. The SUV's brake lights came on a little longer this time. She checked her rear view out of habit. The ramp she'd come down from was not there. Not in any way she could put her tires on. Behind hung a smooth line of concrete barrier and a sticker-sized sign that simply said 0. She keyed up. Dispatch. I'm on an unlisted auxiliary road west of 244. Possibly a temporary detour. Advise any other units to avoid until I confirm re-entry. Sierra 3, copy detour. GPS puts you still on main line. You sure you're off it? April glanced at the small arrow on her mapping tablet. It drifted with her, stubbornly insisting she was in her lane on I-61. Affirmative. I'm off. Might be a map lag. The SUV ahead slowed and activated its hazards. April gave a slow chirp on her siren to let the driver know help was behind them. The vehicle rolled to the shoulder in a controlled way and stopped near a call box that shouldn't have existed because all the old call boxes had been removed years ago. The box was new. Its door was closed. A single moth circled the sodium lamp above it. April parked behind at a safe angle and lit the rear of her cruiser to yellow. The night stayed steady. She stepped out and felt the strange familiarity of a place she'd never been. The air smelled like heat left over from a day she hadn't lived here, and somewhere water moved through a culvert with a low whisper. She approached the SUV, seeing a blanket on the passenger seat, a cooler on the floorboard, and a devotional card tucked in the visor. The driver rolled the window down a crack. A young man with tired eyes and a calm jawline looked back. He had the serenity of someone not surprised by much. Am I supposed to be here? He asked. Where were you headed? 27B, he said. My app told me to take exit 0. Then it told me to continue for 500 feet, and then it told me to continue for 500 feet again. April scanned the roadside. The same billboard stood across the way, the squirrel's smile persistent, the phone number unchanged. She could see, faintly, her own tire tracks in the fine grit. Except she couldn't. Not if she had only just arrived. She clicked her flashlight low and found the smallest mark in the dust. A crescent from the toe of her boot, in exactly the place she was about to step. She didn't test it with her foot. She simply stepped a little further to the side. Pop it in park, she said in an even voice. We're going to be fine, stay put a second. She walked to the call box. The door opened with a neat magnetic release. Inside was a handset like a landline's, simple, fixed to the panel by a coiled cord. Above, a placard carried a single sentence. If you find yourself here, wait for the sign to change. The lettering was stamped into aluminum, the kind of official kindness that shows up on bridges and at reservoir overlooks. April thumbed the handle. The line was dead. Not the empty dead of a cable cut, more the steady calm of a line that wasn't ready yet. She looked up at the highway overhead. Through the gap where the connector had passed, she could see the underside of the overpass and, beyond, a sliver of westbound lanes. A dynamic message sign hung 2 miles ahead, a black rectangle asleep in its frame. Far off, a leaping smear of light indicated someone changing lanes. "Dispatch," she said. "You seeing any odd signage on your cameras near 2:45, westbound? Anything out of test?" A pause. "Sierra 3, DMS board at 2:46, is scheduled to cycle a test at 02:15. "That what you're seeing?" "Maybe," April said. The feeling ran through her like a line on a map that finally connected. "Keep me updated when it flips." The driver in the SUV got out, moving with care. April held up a hand, and he stopped, respectful. "Sorry," he said. This place feels like a waiting room." "It might be exactly that," she said. "Name?" "Evan." "How long have you been here, Evan?" He checked his watch, and then laughed softly in a way that wasn't mocking anything, just loosening fear. "Every time I check, it says 2:06. She let that sit. "License. Registration." "When you're ready." He passed them through the crack. The plastic of his license had an old sheen, the photo a little soft, like it had been printed on a different machine. The expiration date was a year that had already come and gone, then been extended, then replaced by a sticker. The sticker was in perfect condition. Nothing about it was wrong enough to write down or right enough to ignore. April walked back to her trunk and took out 3 triangles and a few C. She placed the triangles in a far too cautious line, point to shoulder, and then stepped back. The air around them felt slightly thicker, as if the road held its breath in that stripe. She struck the fusee and let the Palomar mount. Small red flame climb. The light looked almost embarrassed to be burning here. A sound came up through the pavement that had nothing to do with engines. It was a low, steady tone, the sound guardrail makes when wind passes it on cold nights. Except there was no wind. The tone rose and then flattened. Above, the message board woke, an amber grid knitting itself into letters. "Check traffic with care," it said. Then, "Left lane closed 2 miles." April watched the sentence finish itself, and as it did, a subtle pressure shifted. It felt exactly like a ramp meter releasing cars. She turned to Evan. "Get in. When I wave, follow my bumper. Do not deviate." He slid back in, obedience not fear in the move. She jogged to her driver's door and settled behind the wheel. The fusee's ember a small sunrise near the bumper. She checked mirrors, checked for a sound no radio would ever broadcast, and then eased forward as if moving across a narrow bridge. For a second, nothing happened. Then the painted line to her left became a seam with purpose, and the concrete barrier ahead cast a different angle of shadow, and didn't move with her eyes. A lane that wasn't there became something she could occupy. The road rose 1 inch. Her tires picked up a whispery texture and then lost it. The billboard squirrel smiled in a new version of itself, same grin, different tier. She gave a soft wave through the glass. Evan moved. Behind, his hazards stayed on like a talisman. April guided them to a notch in the barrier that revealed itself as if a switch had been flipped. They eased through. For an instant, the angle was wrong. The world looked misaligned by a degree, like a picture frame, not quite square. Then it clicked into place, and there was the westbound shoulder of Interstate 61, the familiar rumble strip under her tires like the bass line of a favorite song. April merged. Evan matched. She let him come up alongside in the right lane enough to see his face. He laughed once, a sound of relief no one could fake. He gave the smallest salute 2 fingers from the wheel and then, quietly, took the next real exit without signaling, as if he didn't want to bother the night with any more announcements. "Sierra 3, dispatch said, unaware of the geometry that had just rearranged itself. "Board test complete. All signs nominal." "Copy," she said, glancing at the mirror. The place where exit 0 had been was now nothing at all except a slice of shadow that moved with the grade. The number on the green plate, if there had ever been a number, now read 244A like it always had. She pulled into the breakdown lane a mile later. and sat with the engine idling, her hand on the cool plastic of the radio. She wrote her narrative in the CAD with the kinds of words the world accepts: attempted contact with disabled vehicle, assisted motorist, rejoin traffic. She did not type the part about the aluminum placard and its advice. She did not type that the triangles in her trunk were now 4, not 3, the extra older, its reflective tape a different era's hue. She did not type the small paper bag crumpled near her right foot with a Cutler's Pecans logo on the side. The bag was empty. It smelled faintly of salt and sugar. Later, long after the sky had finished trading black for blue, she swung by an off-ramp near a rural stretch and asked DOT in a polite voicemail about a billboard permit with a squirrel on it. The call came back that afternoon from a woman who sounded like she'd spent a career answering questions no one else remembered to ask. "Cutler's?" the woman said. "They took that down in 9. The frame's still there. Nobody pays for the copy anymore." "The frame? Just an empty rack. Nobody's put any skin on it since." She paused, considerate. "Why, you seen it lit?" "Just making a list," April said. For a few weeks, exit 0 didn't show again. The road settled into its patient rhythm. April checked 100 shoulders and a dozen mile markers that had small birds perched on top, like punctuation marks. She helped a trucker with a blown airline, changed a tire for a woman whose jack had rusted into its cradle, stood with a teenage driver whose confidence had evaporated into tears the minute the hazard lights clicked on. Nights slid by. The small red ember at the base of her thoughts cooled. Then, on a Friday when the sky was so clear it looked like it had been scrubbed, her tablet threw a breadcrumb of a call near mile 244, multiple 911 hang-ups, location uncertain, likely pocket dials. She slowed in the right lane, watching the shoulder, her eyes doing the old scan that sometimes notices what the present is trying not to say. A green sign gleamed momentarily too bright, and for one heartbeat the number on it was nothing at all, just an empty space where a digit was supposed to live. April breathed once, sat up a little, and let the car run exactly the way training says to run it. Steady, predictable, like someone who knows this place and has made peace with its surprises. The sign resolved to 244A again. Traffic hissed. A hawk lifted from a light pole with a casual pump. She checked her odometer without thinking about it. It read 0 for one click of the micro digit, then rolled to 0.1. She smiled in a way nobody saw. At the next plaza, she bought a small bag of nuts from a vending machine, partly to break the superstition, partly because the night had asked for a ridiculous, kind offering, and she felt like giving it. The bag wasn't from Cutler's. It was from a brand she actually recognized. It didn't matter. There are stretches of highway that behave themselves under the sun and breathe differently at 2 in the morning. Some places hold a turn so gentle it can gather a person and wait with them without letting them feel trapped. April learned the exact time the message board up ahead ran its test, and, on nights when the air felt like paper just before it's folded, she eased her speed by 2 miles an hour near mile 244. She kept an extra triangle in the trunk. She kept a spare fusee in the side pocket nobody ever used. She found the aluminum placard sentence sitting quietly in her head whenever she stood on concrete and listened for sounds that don't come through speakers. If you find yourself here, wait for the sign to change. That was a kind of law too, written in letters and enforced by patients. And when motorists asked, without asking, whether they were supposed to be here, it was the best answer in the middle of nothing. Yes. For a minute, long enough for the road to remember where it meant to take you. Story number 3. The prairie between towns didn't care about clocks. It ran flat and wide under the stars, a sea of pale grass and blacktop, gently domed by the night. Officer Kayla Reed knew the long, quiet north of County Line Road, where the wind farm's red lights blinked in slow agreement, where the radio hummed like a sleeping dog. Her cruiser was a small island of light in a landscape content with its darkness. She drifted past mile 173 with the comfort of repetition. Her dash lights cast a low green wash. The console sipped power and warmth. To the south, a string of grain silos made a silhouette of blunt towers. It was a night without drama, the kind that lulls a person into thinking the road has no teeth. Traffic was a sparse necklace. A pickup 2 miles ahead, a distant pair of headlights in her mirror. The radar read steady numbers. The weather app said clear. A breeze at 8 miles per hour. Visibility good. Even the coyotes, if they were out, kept their voices to themselves. The first odd thing was not a sound or a shape. It was a gesture. Half a mile ahead, at the dark foot of a gentle rise, a figure stood in the right lane wearing a high-visibility vest that reflected like a small sundae. The arm moved slowly, a precise, practiced motion. Two arcs, like the top half of a circle, then a palm-down hold, as if telling the night itself to slow. No flashing truck, no cones, just the figure and the motion. Kayla touched the brakes as smoothly as if she'd planned to the whole time. Her light bar rolled to amber. She eased to the left lane and let the cruiser slow to a cautious crawl, scanning for equipment, for an arrow board, for anything that said closure in the language of the road. The figure held the sign, a double-sided paddle, slow on one face, and stop on the other, tilted toward her in favor of slow. The gloved hand made the circles, again, patient, deliberate, as if measuring time with the air. District 4, Sierra 9, she told dispatch, the old call sign comfortable on her tongue. Possible work crew at 1-7-3 eastbound. No permits on the board? Negative on any scheduled lane restrictions, dispatch answered after a beat. DOT's overnight list is empty north of the line. You need a traffic car? Stand by. Kayla slipped her car to the shoulder, angled it to protect the right lane, and set her rear deck to solid yellow. The grill lights stayed off. Her door opened to cool air carrying the smell of cut alfalfa. Crickets ticked in the ditch. A transmission line made a fine, high note that almost felt like a thought instead of a sound. She stepped out, boots on rumble strip. The figure remained in the lane, unmoving except for the measured motion of the arm and the tilt of the sign. The vest glowed in her headlights, its chevrons crisp and modern, but the paddle had the old round style with a wooden handle. Not many of those were left. Evening, she called, calm and clear. You working solo? The figure did not answer, but the sign turned toward her a degree more, and the palm flattened in that firm, mothering way that says, hold here and be wise about it. Kayla lifted a hand in a mirror of the gesture, an acknowledgement, and took 2 steady steps forward, scanning for a parked pickup tucked behind the swell of the hill. Nothing. No diesel idle, no bucket truck, no wink of a beacon. Just the dark shape of the grade, the shoulder's thin white line, and the slow traffic of stars. Her radio hissed with the noise of a side channel she didn't carry. A faint stagger of syllables fluttered by, not words so much as a rhythm. 2 beats, a pause, then one long sigh across the band. The high-tension lines sang again. The figure's arm traced its loop and held. She lifted the mic. Dispatch. Do me a favor, ping DOT for ground sensors this side of the culvert at 1-7-3. Ask about roadbed reports. The answer came with the confidence of someone who had asked Otter. Copy. Stand by. Kayla moved back to her trunk, retrieved 3 LED beacons, and rolled them into a diagonal pattern across the right lane. Little coins of amber pulsing in a soft wave, the kind of friendly boundary that didn't frighten people but made them cautious. She didn't like flares here. A spark in prairie grass could find its own mischief. The world held its breath for a full minute. Then, in the dark beyond the rise, something shifted in the earth. It was not a crack or crumble. It was a low, thoughtful sound, like a heavy book settling on a shelf. The road under her feet gave the smallest answer, a vibration so gentle that if she'd been in the car, she would have missed it. District 4 to Sierra 9, dispatch said. DOT system shows a ground moisture alert at 173.2. No active alarms, just a warning. They've had culvert undermining in wet cycles. Last inspection was spring. Copy, Kayla said. Her breath ran slow and steady in the cool air. Advise units to reduce speed through my mile. I'm setting a closure on the right. She grabbed her portable arrow board from the trunk, the small one, the kind that clips to the receiver hitch and throws a kind amber suggestion, and set it to merge left. Its little bulbs blinked in obedient sequence. A pair of headlights crested the rise and eased down at her cues. She raised an open hand, showed them her palm, then pointed to the left lane. The driver's face was nothing but a shadow behind glass, but the vehicle moved with that good-natured compliance people show when the night asks. Beyond the arc of her headlights, the figure in the vest remained. The sign in the hands was now turned toward the dark, its stop face held out to the night like a red moon. Kayla felt her muscles tighten not in fear, but in ready patience. The old move from training. Slow everything down, extend time, let the danger arrive at a crawl instead of a sprint. "What are we doing?" she asked the air, in the voice an officer uses when the problem is nearby but not yet visible. The figure's arm made the arc again. 2 circles, palm flat, hold. Far behind, a hollow percussion began heavy tires hitting expansion joints. But the sound bent wrong. It made a pattern at odds with distance, deepening like thunder as it came forward. Kayla checked the mirror. An articulated bus was approaching in the right lane, steady and smooth. There was no reason it wouldn't see her closure. No reason it wouldn't merge left with all the mild courtesy of open highway. The bus blinker came on late. A single blink to the left, then no movement. Another blink, no movement. Kayla stepped into the edge of the lane and gave the universal swing of the arm. "Over here. Come over. Now." The bus maintained speed, a mechanical certainty bearing down. The figure in the vest lifted the paddle higher and swung it down with a solid authority. "Stop." Kayla heard the driver's horn a short, surprised chirp, as if the coach had a voice and had used it too late. She raised both hands. Her light bar went to a bigger, wider pattern. The bus swam the slightest degree left and then held. Why hold? She knew the answer before she formed the thought. The driver had seen something she hadn't. To him, perhaps, the left lane did not look like a lane at all. The earth groaned again, not loud, but undeniable. Kayla took 3 quick steps forward and knelt at the fog line. The asphalt wore its winter scars like faint wrinkles. A darker line ran across the right lane, hair-thin at first and then slightly jagged, like a pencil mark drawn by an unsteady hand. It wasn't there a minute ago. In the glare of her light, she saw a pulse scour the dust along the edge of the crack. The land underneath breathed, just once. The gap widened a fraction, then relaxed. The wrong kind of tide. Her radio clicked. "Dot says they've got a 90-foot clay seam under that mile," dispatch reported, voice tightened now by interest. "If the culvert is pinched, it can load the slab and let go. Nobody's on call close by. You want a backhoe, or you want to hold till morning?" "I'll hold," Kayla said. "Get me a trooper from southbound for a rolling roadblock, and call the county bus line if you can. There's a coach within a minute of me." "Copy." She was already walking into the lane, palms out, her body an answer to the bus that said, "You will stop because I am asking, and because there's nowhere to go that's better than stopping." The bus's brakes whispered on, the sound of air redirecting its mind. It eased to a stop with a grace that would have made a ballet coach proud. Behind it, a sedan settled in line. The driver of the bus looked forward, eyes wide and steady, hands white on the wheel. Kayla nodded at him and pointed to the left. He shook his head once. "No, not yet." The figure in the vest took 2 steps backward, into the exact place where the dark line on the asphalt wanted to grow. The gloved hand did not shake. The paddle's stop face gleamed. The 2 slow arcs were gone now. It was all hold, hold, hold. Kayla did not like other people standing on the spot where the bad idea meant to express itself. She opened her mouth to say, "Off the lane, come behind the cruiser," but the words dissolved on her tongue. There was no way to phrase it that didn't feel like saying it to a mirror. She put the bus to park with a flat palm motion, and then she walked up the right edge of the lane to the rise, moving slow, listening with her feet. The night behind her was a scale model of a calm highway engines idling, radios whispering, a far-off coyote singing a single 2-note phrase like someone practicing scales and stopping. At the crown of the hill, the problem showed itself. A shallow sag in the asphalt, a soft buckle that wasn't there at sunset. It ran from the right shoulder to the center line. On the far side of the sag, the paint had a fresh, wet look even though there had been no rain. The culvert under the road would have been no more than a round throat of corrugated steel under a veneer of packed earth. If the throat had been clogged by leaves and a season's worth of prairie, pressure would have built until the soil remembered it was just pieces with a plan. She knelt and pressed a palm flat on the painted stripe. The faintest tremor met her. Something shifting, not now, but soon. She stood and walked, backward until she could see her cruiser, the bus, the beacons, and the vest. The figure was not where she'd left it. It was 2 paces farther back, as if the line itself had carried it like a conveyor. It raised the paddle high and then put the sign's edge to the pavement, pressing it lightly like a ruler marking a cut. Kayla did not question the show. She accepted the instruction, turned to the bus, and held up a single finger. 1 minute. The driver raised his hand in return, palm trembling with adrenaline the way all bodies do when the math of proximity catches up. Her radio clicked. County Transit says their coach is Route 9. Confirmed driver last name Mendez. He says his left side looks like open grass in his headlight glare. He thought your lights were on the wrong side. They're not, Kayla said gently. Tell him we're here together. She set more beacons in a wider arc, her hands moving without wasted motion. In their strobing light, the figure was briefly a negative dark where it had been bright, bright where its edges cut the night, and then it was itself again, ordinary in its clarity. She could make out a detail now, a small patch on the vest's shoulder, the threadbare outline of a county name no longer used. The paddle's handle had a notch near the top, as if a hand had whittled it to know exactly where to grip. The earth under the roadside. The line across the lane widened by the width of a fingernail, then a coin. It did not crack dramatic. It simply let go as if tired of pretending to be seamless. The center line buckled. A dark slot opened and revealed a small, cold space that smelled like wet dirt and old iron. It was not a canyon. It was enough. Kayla took 2 quick steps to her cruiser and hit the siren's slow yelp, not to panic anyone, just to stretch the moment into one long note that said, "Pay attention to this." Behind her, another set of headlights appeared at the top of the rise. Her partner from the south had arrived, timing neat as a drill. He slid to a stop with his car angled against the left lane, gave her a look that asked a dozen questions in one lift of eyebrows, and then, seeing the line, the sag, the figure, he didn't waste breath. He stepped out and added his lights to the instruction. The road let go in a modest way. The right lane slumped into a shallow U and stayed there like a couch cushion in need of fluffing. No roaring brake, no cinematic drop. Just enough of a wrongness to swallow a wheel and make a vehicle decide it no longer wanted to go in a straight line. Kayla exhaled carefully. The figure lowered the paddle and took 1 pace toward her, then stopped. There was still no sound from it. No breath. No communication that carried over the short air between them. But the message arrived anyway, the same way a person knows at a glance which line at a register will move quicker, or which cloud intends rain, and which one is only decoration. They held the closure for an hour, while DOT roused a crew from town. In that hour, the bus driver said thank you twice, 10 minutes apart, as if the first one had not covered it. He gave the road a tender glance each time, like it was an animal he had almost stepped on in the dark. Cars rolled up and were redirected. Nobody argued. The prairie taught patience, without announcing the lesson. The figure stayed where it was, moving only to tilt the sign for the odd driver who needed personal attention. Once, a pickup driver rolled his window down and called a thanks into the night, and Kayla watched the figure turn toward him, as if it heard and accepted the praise with the quiet that says, "It's not about me." When the DOT foreman arrived, a big man with tired posture and a warm, competent voice, he stepped out, took one look, and pointed his crew like a conductor. He thanked Kayla and her partner, and then looked past them down the lane. His expression changed the way faces do when they see a thing they didn't expect but recognize anyway. "You saw him," he said softly, too low for any record. Kayla glanced at the lane. The figure still stood, its edges crisp in the light. "Saw who?" The foreman did not smile. He simply nodded. A man acknowledging a colleague the rest of the crowd could not. He walked to the shoulder and picked up a chalk stick from his vest pocket. On the asphalt, he wrote a letter and a number in a neat block. D3. Then he added a year below it with a fingertip and the chalk dust. 1997. "Had a flagger took a bad step out here during a spring flood," he said simply. Not in the tone of a ghost story, but in the voice of someone saying a name at a roll call. Name was Dale. He had a way of doing the slowdown sign. 2 arcs, then a hold. Gave it a kind of rhythm you couldn't ignore. He tilted his head toward the lane, not looking directly. Some nights, when the ground's not in a generous mood, well, you know the gesture, Kayla said. You don't forget watching someone good at their job, he said. And you don't forget when the place itself acts like it remembers them too. He bent and picked up the paddle the figure had set at the edge of the lane. Kayla hadn't seen it happen. One moment the paddle had been in a gloved hand, and the next it lay beside the fog line, as if someone had leaned it there for a break. Up close, the sign was older than it had seemed. The red paint dulled by years, the wood handle polished by thousands of grips. A stamped aluminum tag near the bracket read, in tiny, nearly erased letters, D3 Sign Shop, property of District 3. We stopped using this style a long time back, the foreman said. He held it with a kind of reverence a person reserves for tools that have proven themselves. But I know this particular friend. I've got the twin in a cabinet that nobody opens much. He met Kayla's eyes then, as if both of them were about to say something obvious and didn't need to. Thanks for listening to The Road. She almost said, it told me plainly. But she didn't. She just glanced at the dark seam, at the soft buckle, at the night widening its shoulders like someone adjusting a jacket. We'll keep the lane closed until you're shored, she said. The foreman nodded and handed the paddle toward her as if to let her feel the balance. She accepted it, surprised by its weight. In her hands it felt both solid and extremely temporary, like a life raft. The wood was warm, from nothing she could name. She held it a moment longer than necessary, and then passed it back. By the time the sky paled, a crew had built a temporary bridge of steel plates across the slump, a mechanical bandage with the promise of permanency to come. Traffic eased over the plates with little dings and thumps. The bus that had waited so well went last, its driver giving a small salute to the shoulder as he passed, a private goodbye to the problem. Kayla stayed until the foreman signed off. He thanked her again in a way that meant more than the word. He tucked the old paddle under his arm like a violin and walked it to the back of his truck. She watched him handle it with the care one gives a photograph. On the ride back to her beat, the prairie yawned into dawn. Wind farm lights clicked off in a ripple. Birds set their first notes free. The High Line's hum receded into ordinary hearing. Her car smelled faintly of dust, warmed by electronics, of coffee cooling in its stainless cup, of the clean rubber of new floor mats. She looked at her hands on the wheel and noticed a smudge of chalk on her left thumb. D3, it might have said. If smudges could be read back into letters. She wiped it on her pant leg, without hurry. In her report, she wrote the things that fit. Possible undermining, right lane closure, dot notified, bus held, plates installed. In the narrative she added, observed figure signaling traffic in advance of closure. Made visual contact. Utilized standard hand signals to secure scene. It wasn't untrue. Weeks later, a warm rain blew across the prairie in sheets, and the eastbound lanes flashed with standing water like dropped mirrors. Kayla drove past mile 173 with the cautious respect people bring to miles that have offered a lesson. On the shoulder, atop the new guardrail that gleamed with recent work, a safety vest hung by its collar, fluttering once like a hand raised. It might have been a stray, knocked off the back of a work truck. It might have been nothing at all. She did not stop for it. It would be there if anyone needed it. The prairie would go on not caring about clocks. But there were minutes where it made exceptions. 2 arcs, a hold. A gesture people understand without school. When the ground underfoot feels intent on a change, some steady hand chooses to show up early. And if that hand belongs to someone the road remembers, well, no one complains about good timing. Story number 4. The coast road wore 2 bridges like twin ribs crossing the tidal bay. One was an old bascule span the county had locked in the down position a decade earlier, its gears oiled, and then retired to a kind of eternal patience. The other was the new high bridge that swept gracefully over shipping lanes and took the brunt of midnight traffic box trucks on clockwork schedules, rental cars piloted by blinking tourists, locals who knew the exact minute the fog found the causeway, and when it decided to leave. Officer Lena Ortiz's beat ran from the salt works to the ferry interchange, which meant she knew the bridges as well as she knew the codes on her radio. Her cruiser's headlights painted a narrow tunnel through a mist that had drifted in off the flats and settled with a gentle insistence. It was the kind of fog that made the world feel closer than it really was. The kind that softened sound and gave each light a halo. The night had been good to her so far. A stranded sedan in the turnout whose driver waved gratefully when the jump pack woke his engine, a small herd of raccoons that decided the center divider was a parade route, and then had second thoughts. She passed the old bascule shack, a small square room on stilts with windows for eyes, and noted the same detail she always did. A tiny brass bell mounted above the door The kind of thing a tender might have rung once to warn pedestrians the span was moving. No power to it anymore. It sat like jewelry on an old coat. Up on the high bridge, red and green navigation lights dotted the black water below like a necklace laid on velvet. A foghorn sounded from the mouth of the bay, deep and patient. Lena's marine monitor standard here, because sometimes the only way to untangle a mess on the bridge was to talk to a tug captain, sat quiet on channel 13. Lanes were open, overhead dynamic signs slept, their amber grids blank. She hit the crest and let the slope ease her back toward the old span. Her eyes did what they always did, checked for the subtle wobble of fatigue in other vehicles, scanned for the barely visible wobble of water on the deck that meant the mist was doing more than decoration. Everything read normal until her radio spoke with a voice it had no reason to carry. "Barker Bridge to road traffic," a man said, low and even, as if speaking into a microphone with a habit. "Stand by draw." Lena's hand moved to the volume, not to turn it down, just to anchor herself to the equipment. She glanced at the display. Her patrol channel still showed District 3. The marine monitor remained silent. The bridge name was wrong for this century. Everyone called it Bay 4 now. Barker was the name on the old brass plaque bolted to the retired counterweight. "Dispatch, Sierra 2-1, she said, watching her speed and the line of taillights ahead. "Did you copy a transmission for Barker Bridge?" "Could be a bleed from Marine to Patrol." "Negative," dispatch replied, businesslike but curious. "No cross patches active. You okay out there?" "Affirmative," she said. She didn't add anything about bells or old names. Her headlights skimmed the bascule's fixed seam as she came off the high bridge. It was a remarkable piece of engineering, even in retirement, two leaves that used to lift together with careful grace. At the joint, the deck had a faint line of steel across the asphalt, a hinge turned decorative. The mist thinned. For a second or two, it seemed brighter, as if a light had struck it from below. Then, as quickly, the brightness faded and left the usual pale world. Up ahead, a small hatchback braked more than it needed to, and then corrected, embarrassed. Lena eased to give them space. In the corner of her windshield, red pinpricks danced a reflection with no obvious parent. She looked left. The old tender shack's windows caught her headlights and gave them back in polite squares. The little brass bell above the door did not move. Yet in her ears, faint and unmistakable, she heard a bell like the ones old bascules used, a single clear ring that felt like a tap on the shoulder. She nudged her car toward the shoulder and set her rear deck to amber. Habit made her think about the word pileup as a thing to be avoided, not somehow conjured by naming it. The fog made distance a liar. Sudden braking turned into questions, and questions turned into mistakes. Better to slow the whole river before it thought it had to be clever. "Dispatch," she said. "Request message board. Fog. Reduce speed. 35. I'm starting a rolling slowdown at the east approach." "Copy," dispatch said. The board half a mile ahead woke like a rectangle of dawn and typed the words in calm amber. "Fog ahead, reduce. Speed 35 mph. The effect was immediate and quiet. Taillights stacked more neatly. The line of cars became a line of people deciding to be careful together. On Channel 13, the marine monitor broke its shyness with a proper voice. "Bay entrance. This is Tug Clary. Pushing inbound on the green, 4 knots. Visibility a quarter mile. Any drawmarms must hold. We're plenty under." You didn't need a drawbridge to hear a tug talk like that. It was just professional courtesy, shouting into fog to let anyone listening know where their ship was. "Clary, Roger inbound," another voice said, older and smoother, like someone who had slept well and liked their work. "Road standing by. Keep to your mark." Lena felt an odd affection at that. It was the same tone she used when a nervous driver asked if they were allowed to stand on the shoulder while they called a tow. "Yes, you're allowed. Yes, keep to your mark." The old words were simple, because they worked. She rolled to a stop at the gore for the low span's pedestrian entrance. The old gates, the kind that had once dropped across the roadway while the leaves rose, were gone. Cut clean years earlier. The concrete posts remained, stained with circles where the hinge arms had once bolted in. She stepped out of the cruiser and listened. Wind moved across the flats with a felt touch. Somewhere far inland, a train played a chord of 2 notes, and then reconsidered. The small bell rang again. It wasn't in the air so much as in the structure, like a note sneaking through the bones of the bridge. In response, it seemed, a few cars far back tapped their brakes. Not panic. Not even a real reaction. Just a ripple of obedience to something polite and firm. She walked up the pedestrian access ramp with her flashlight at a low angle. Her boots met concrete with a reassuring sound. The shack at the far end looked like every picture of a small control room in a book. Simple, square, practical. Its door had a rust that didn't rub off on hands because salt had turned it to a different thing. The window that faced the water had a view worth a day off. She tried the knob. It turned. The door swung inward on hinges that sighed like a good chair accepting weight. Inside, the air carried the museum-clean smell of metal that has decided to sleep. A rack of breakers sat quiet in a panel that had had its main feed pulled long ago. A clipboard hung on a nail with a handwritten line on the top sheet. Span secured per closure order. No date, just a line, made with a black felt tip in a hand with confidence. A desk in the corner held a logbook. The pages were used to a certain routine: time, wind, tide, state of the span. The entries didn't run to the present. They stopped a few years back, without drama. But someone had left a pencil in the spine as a habit. Without thinking it would do anything but feel right, Lena picked the pencil up and flipped to a blank page. She wrote the time in the upper left, Ardian Sishiefen. Next to it she wrote, in letters that felt like they belonged here. Traffic slow. Fog. Holding. Her radio clicked. Sierra 2-1. Board is posted, dispatch said. No incidents reported on the causeway. You still seeing anything odd? Just fog and caution, she said. On her way out, she touched the small brass bell with a knuckle. It made a sound like a smile. Delicate, real, and no louder than it had to be. Back on the road, she pulled to the center line and started the kind of rolling slowdown that felt more like a demonstration than an order. She let a pack of cars bunch behind her at 35, then 28, then 25. The way you do when your arm is out in a crosswalk and a dozen people decide at once to be civil. The rear deck lights painted the mist with a calm that felt earned. Midway across, a motorcycle group appeared behind the pack. 4 bikes riding 2 and 2, headlamps bright as coins. They slid into the rhythm without drama. Bodies loose. Hands steady. Lena watched their spacing and pictured what 50 miles an hour would look like in this visibility. Not good. She kept her speed where it was and let the pack stay collected. At the low-span seam, the pavement darkened a shade, not from water but from the ocean's breath condensing on cold steel. Tires hissed an extra note when they crossed it. It wasn't dangerous. It was just a place you didn't want to surprise. The marine monitor crackled again. Clary, you still on the green. Got you a beam, the mid-pylons, the older voice said. Good set. Hold what you got. Clary copies, the tug answered, voice nearer now, the square vowel of a captain from up the coast. It's a soup. You watching out for us, Barker? Always, the voice said, cheerful in a way that had nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with competence. Road's good. We'll let them across before we let you under. Lena's hand paused on the wheel. The language was wrong for here. Boats had height enough under the new bridge to pass without thinking. Maybe old habits don't mind the years. They just speak up on nights when the world comes smaller. The lead car in the pack had done what all lead cars do when they sense an event without information. The driver reached for a behavior that felt correct. They drifted toward the right shoulder, as if the old gates were real, as if a red light had politely told them to stop. Lena flashed her alley light across the lane, a gentle wash that said, "No. Stay with me." The car corrected, then held steady across the seam. She didn't see the source of the next sound as much as she felt its geometry. Somewhere below, a boat's bow kissed a swell, and then took a breath. It was not loud. It was presence. Without coordinating or knowing, the 4 motorcycles in her mirror lightened their hands and glided, as if a conductor had tapped his baton once on a lectern, and they were attentive students. They went across the seam like music, The pack followed. The foghorn at the mouth of the bay sounded in a longer tone that could have been punctuation. At the far end of the bridge, Lena peeled off to the shoulder and let the river pass. Traffic reformed itself. Trucks found gaps. Locals took traditional exits without signaling because here that was a kind of signature. The motorcycle group rose to their usual pace and went on. Her radio kept its ordinary hum. Her body knew the difference between stress and alert, and what she felt was the comfortable aftermath of choosing correctly in a place that could have taken advantage of a mistake. She let herself roll back toward the old shack, drawn by a polite curiosity rather than any need to prove. The door was still ajar where she'd left it. The brass bell sat with its little smile. On the logbook page where she had written her line, a new word appeared directly below it in the same neat, confident hand as the older entries. The pencil lay where she had set it, unmoved. The word was short. Good. She looked at it longer than such a simple word warranted, which is to say exactly as long as it deserved. On the way out, she shut the door with the kind of care a person gives to a thing that has done them a favor. The email from DOT came late the next morning. One of the techs who liked to adopt orphaned questions had gone digging. No power to the Barker controls, it read. Main feed disconnected at the vault. Bell circuits removed in 2011. The shack is nominally accessible for inspection. That's about it. Did you, hear something? She replied with a thank you and a shrug in words. It was a county office. Everyone had a tolerance for the odd that fit into a single line without the need for elbows. In the weeks that followed, fog returned when it wanted, and stayed as long as it liked. When it did, Lena did the thing that had felt unnecessary until it didn't. She started the slowdown early. She touched the horn at the top of the high bridge in a friendly double tap that wasn't official in any book, and she watched the seam ahead the way you watch a friend's face in a crowded room, looking for signs of trouble. Sometimes, for no clear reason, she heard a bell one ring, clear and kind. And she would set her hand on the wheel a little differently, ready to show everyone how to move like a school of fish instead of a line of strangers. One late shift in spring, she pulled a stranded tourist off the shoulder, a family whose rental had decided it liked the scenery so much it wouldn't leave. She set flares in a careful line that made a gentle curve rather than a straight rule, and she found herself glancing at the shack between motions. The bell remained itself. The old logbook sat with its pencil. The words she had written weeks earlier were no longer alone. A handful of similar notes sat below in the same hand. Fog again. Road holding. Stand by. It was not a conversation so much as an exchange of courtesies. She asked an older sergeant about it one night over coffee, framing her question the way you do when you're prepared for the other person not to be surprised. The sergeant smiled a little and blew on her cup. You know they used to race school buses across that thing, she said. Not for fun when the bells started and you had a line of them and a schedule. It was a different time. She didn't push the story into drama. She nodded toward the window, where the bay lay asleep in dark pewter. Nobody ever minded a bridge tender who knew how to tell people to wait. People like being told by somebody who sounds like they've seen this before. On a clear night after a week of fog, the dynamic sign stayed asleep, and the marine monitor told only the banal poetry of shipping. Inbound on the green, outbound on the red. Lena crossed both bridges with the kind of easy attention that comes when the world isn't testing you. At the far end of the low span, she saw a small cleaning crew from DOT parked on the pedestrian access, 2 workers with reflective pants and a desire to finish before dawn. One of them waved her over and pointed to the brass bell with a grin. We polished it, he said. Figured it ought to look like it means business. She laughed. You'll start a rumor, she said. Already started, he answered. Then, more seriously, we heard a ring last week after midnight. Might have been a bike bell. Might have been this guy. He touched the bell with a finger as if it were a cat, not a machine. It made a sound that filled the small shack, and then went no farther, a secret told, and kept instantly. As summer came, and the fog became a morning thing rather than a blanket for the night, Lena found herself still slowing slightly at the seam. Not every night. Just the ones when the air felt like a held sentence. The motorcycles that ran as a loose club started waving at her on those nights without knowing why, beyond the fact that it felt right. Tug captains, unseen but present, called their positions on Channel 13 and signed off with small notes of courtesy. Bridge, you're a gentleman, one said once. out loud to no one on the highway, and then pushed on up, channel with his raft of barges like a father moving a sleeping child from the car to the bed. Nobody put it in a manual. Nobody wrote it on a placard. The rule lived in the small space between night noise and a single bell. If the road behaves like it, remembers how to take care of itself, help it. A day shift might never notice. The 9-to-5 world passed over at 60 and saw just a line across asphalt where engineers had said yes a long time ago. The quiet hour between 2 and 3 heard a story older than patrol cars and newer than the last person who drove too fast in fog. It heard a voice say, "Stand by, draw," and it listened, and nothing bad insisted on happening. When she had time, Lena would park at the turnout where the old span meets the new and watch the bay. She'd think about the difference between warning and fear, between a noise that startles and a sound that says, "I'm here." She'd think about how many kinds of work require someone to stand where others decide whether to go or wait. Then she'd put the car in drive and return to the part of the job that looked like normal driving to anyone who didn't know what it takes to keep a highway boring at midnight. The brass bell at the shack kept its modest place, bright now from the attention of care, ready to be exactly as visible as it needed to be. If it rang again in a fog that wrapped the bridge like a scarf, she knew how to answer. Not with drama. With a rolling line of lights, a steady hand on the wheel, and the soft, official language of people shepherding other people through a cloud. Story number 5. The canyon road had been a compromise with the mountain for as long as anyone remembered. Switchback after switchback clung to the shale, with the river stitching silver in the darkness far below. After the last winter, a bite taken out of the slope turned a wide section into a one-lane chute bounded by concrete K-rail. The plan was simple. Bag the temporary signals at night and close the stretch until crews could return at dawn. Sometimes a pilot car led convoys on a schedule. But after a series of small slides in spring, even that had been suspended. The mountain had asked for quiet hours, and the county had agreed. Officer Rhea Park ran that night beat from the overlook to the tunnel mouth, a loop of blacktop that knew her tires. She liked the way sound behaved up here, how her radio sounded close enough to touch, how the wind seemed to speak from the guardrail like a whisperer. On the shoulder at mile 62, Sage brushed the fender with a polite hiss when she pulled onto gravel to check a long view. Coyotes kept their business to gullies, their calls distant and mild. Her dashboard threw a calm green into the car. The dynamic sign at the top of the grade slept dark when she passed it the first time. The mountain was off. Duty too. She made her checks. Rockfall fences intact, runoff channels clear, K-rail still in line. On the bend called Gull Notch, the scars of a slide ran across the slope like claw marks left over from a bigger day. The air smelled of dust that had forgotten rain. At 2:06. Her tablet threw up a ripple. Sporadic 911 hang-ups. Callers lost, near mile 65. Waiting for the next lead car. The words sat wrong in her head. There was no lead car tonight. There would be no convoys until the engineers said so, and the county posted a new board. She asked dispatch for the feed from the highway advisory radio, out of reflex more than expectation. The HAR's frequency 1610 AM was supposed to be silent until someone keyed a message from a trailer down in the yard. "District," she said, "do we have a test on the advisory radio? I've got callers referencing a pilot car." Dispatch came back with the kind of voice people use when facts have to be checked against habit. "Sierra 4, HAR is off network. Last message was 2 weeks ago for daytime convoys only. Night closures are full. You want me to ping DOT? Please," she said. She thumbed the little knob on the cruiser's AM receiver anyway and rolled down to 1610, a number her hand knew without thinking. Static met her like light rain on a roof. Then, behind it, a tone resolved, the clean two-note chime that always prefaced a recorded advisory. A man's voice followed, warm and practiced, the sound of someone who has explained things often and calmly. "Attention motorists on State Route 19, it said. Single-lane traffic begins at mile 64. The pilot car will depart the west gate on the quarter hour and the east gate on the 3/4. Please form a single file and wait behind the stop line." Rhea eyed the road, the dark blocks of K-rail, the wrapped heads of the bagged signals. She checked her watch. 2:12. Quarter hour at 2:15. She didn't say anything into the radio. She reached for the shifter and let the cruiser gather itself and head for the east gate. The mountain's inside curve narrowed here, forcing the river to lean closer. The K-rail looked like a gray spine, the reflectors on its faces blinking back in a patient series. Her headlights drew the world in a tunnel out of the dark. She rounded the last bend and found 3 cars waiting behind the striped gate arm and 2 barrels, and a sign the county had put up that said, "Road closed nightly 8 p.m., 5 a.m." Their brake lights held a quiet red. Someone had been taught well enough to stop where the paint told them to. Beyond the gate, parked kitty-corner to the K-rail like a bird with one wing tucked, a white pickup idled. Its rear carried a small amber board with the plainest possible message, "Follow me." The letters cycled with a gentle pulse. Its bar lights, older style, clicked a measured pattern, not the frenetic buzz of modern LEDs, but the polite wink of an older era. No DOT crew truck sat nearby. No cones had been pulled aside. Ria's first thought was simple. Someone had come up from the yard without telling anybody. Crews sometimes did that before dawn, thinking of a load they wanted through before traffic woke. Her second thought arrived with a pinch. Even if an old hand had decided to run a convoy, they'd call her. They always called her. No one wanted to be the person who took a train into a tunnel without a schedule. She tapped her siren in the lightest possible yelp, the one that asks for attention without telling anyone to be afraid. She angled the cruiser behind the first waiting car and set her rear deck to amber. The driver of the lead vehicle rolled his window down, a man in his 50s with the look of a person who had not slept properly in a while. "Finally," he said, relieved and not unkind. "Been 20 minutes. There's no pilot car scheduled for nights," she said gently. "Hold here, please." She touched the brim of her cap to soften the instruction. "I'll speak to that driver." She walked to the gate. The white pickup's amber board nodded at her as if saying hello. Its license plate was a little too clean. The left tailgate hinge had a scuff that cut through white to primer like a shallow smile. A badge had been on the door once. She could see the faint ghost of adhesive where lettering had lived. She stepped up to the driver's side and lifted a hand. The cab's window was down. The seat was empty. The engine idled without sound. She could locate it. Was the sense of engine more than the noise? The amber board maintained its message, not in the frantic way of something fending off night, but like a person tapping a wristwatch to keep a beat. She leaned and looked across the cab. Empty passenger seat. A thermos cup sat in the holder with its lid off, steam not rising because in this air, steam didn't keep its shape. The keys leaned in the cylinder, turned to where instruments would be alive. The instrument cluster was dim with the low glow of older dials. The odometer looked of simple. 5 digits. No tenths. The radio in the dash was the kind with preset buttons that clicked when you pressed them. Her own radio chattered. "Sierra 4. Dot confirms HAR is not broadcasting," dispatch said. "The transmitter is sitting cold in the yard. No crews scheduled to run pilot tonight. I'm at the east gate with a white pickup showing 'Follow me,'" Ria said, calm kept in place by training and a small iron piece of instinct. "Cab is empty." Empty did not belong to the situation. Empty belonged to poor jokes, and to new recruits being taught not to put hands where they can't see. Ria stepped around the front of the pickup and looked at the gate arm. It stood vertical, the sleeve that should have covered its hinge thrown aside. The barrels had been rolled back into a neat V. On the other side of the arm, the K-rail lined a narrow world that ducked around the corner and out of sight. The man in the lead car leaned out his window again. "Do we just go?" "No," Ria said. She held up a finger in a polite hold gesture. "Just a minute." The HAR chime played again, faint as a memory. "Pilot car departing east gate," the calm man announced. "Please follow at 15 miles per hour. Maintain a safe distance. Do not stop inside the work zone. There are words that make rooms in the mind all by themselves. Please follow at 15 miles per hour." The sentence unlocked a space Ria had not needed for months. She had run convoys as a younger officer, perched at the tail with her light bar in a slow heartbeat, calling lane positions over the radio to a lead who talked like the road itself. She had watched people breathe easier at the sight of a follow-me truck, at the way the chaos of construction shrank to single file under the authority of amber. The white pickup rocked infinitesimally the way a vehicle does when a foot shifts from brake to accelerator. Its reverse lights did not blink. It rolled forward 1 foot, stopped, and then went still again, a gentle pulse, like the first breath of a swimmer before a long glide. Rhea moved to the gate and caught the man in the lead car's eye, using a small, clear shake of the head that meant wait. She lifted her shoulder mic. Dispatch, lock down both ends and roll a unit to the west gate. I want to stop there in case anyone's queued. Advise all inbound traffic closure holds. I'm taking a walk. And this dispatch. Copy, dispatch said. There was new alertness in the tone, no panic. Just the room in which attention sits up. 2 units rolling from town. West Gate ETA, 9 minutes. She pulled a headlamp from her trunk and clipped it under the brim of her cap. She slid 3 LED beacons under the gate arm and clicked them on, their amber coins marching forward into the throat of the chute. She told the first driver to keep his engine running but to hold tight, do not enter, no matter what the board said. He nodded with a seriousness that recognized the night had gone from boring to a kind of math problem. Then Rhea stepped into the lane. The K-rail made the world into a hallway. Her footsteps ticked on seams. In the beam of her flashlight, the dust on the pavement made a small, low fog of its own. The walls had smears where tires had kissed out of caution. The reflectors blinked at a walking pace, tiny, hesitant lighthouse eyes encouraging her forward. Around the first bend, rocks pebbled out of the slope above with a sound like someone drumming fingertips on a tabletop, and then caught themselves on the wire mesh netting the crews had slung like a hammock. Below the mesh, a scuff of new dust brushed the top edge of the K-rail, fresh enough to mark. Around the second bend, the world narrowed to the tightest spot. Here, the river threw the road against the mountain hard and demanded space. The K-rail turned in, firm and unforgiving, no place to pass, no place to pause, just a thin throat and the promise that it would open again. A narrow bridge hugged the wall with a half-completed new deck covered in plywood sheeting and a gap where steel waited for morning. Day crews had bolted steel plates over the temporary path, the tidy rectangle of their corners dull in her light. A piece of bright engineer's tape lay on the ground near a bolt, the end fluttering the way a lizard's tail twitches after the lizard has gone. She stopped, listened. The white pickup's message board glowed around the corner behind her like a slice of amber sunlight. Follow me! Follow me! The engine idle seemed too far away for the distance. The HAR voice found her again, the sound thin, and broadcast from no speaker she recognized. If you cannot keep pace, pull into designated turnout, the voice offered. Polite and unarguable. Do not stop on the bridge. She walked on. The bridge's steel plates made a different sound under her boot soles, a deep-bellied ringing softened by the plywood. As she crossed the midspan, the mountain exhaled tiny stones somewhere above, and the netting caught them with a sound like light rainfall. The plates thrummed once. She put a hand on the guard pipe bolted to the inside rail. It was cool, slightly damp, alive with the smallest vibration, the way metal knows when someone is on it. At the far end of the bridge, the chute opened a fraction, enough for a wedge of night to sit beside her. A crumbly ledge hung above, its belly chewed out by winter water. The dirt held together because it had not yet been asked not to. The white pickup's light brightened, cut through the curve, and then resolved into itself, rolling forward at the exact polite speed of 15. It entered the narrower part with the confidence of something that had done this 70 times and meant to do it properly the 71st. No driver held the wheel. The cab was as empty as the idea of sleep. Rhea stood inside the shoulder of her fear and made herself a simple piece of geometry. She stepped into the center of the lane and raised her palm. The pickup did not brake hard, because 15 miles per hour does not need drama. It glided and brought its message to a place where it balanced between request and apology. The word follow stuttered once as the LEDs cycled. The amber glow threw her shadow long and thin down the plates like a line cut by a draftsman. The engine sound, or the perception of the engine sound, settled into something like a song line a child hums when it's doing a task well. She spoke aloud because talking is a way to keep shape in a place that wants to steal shapes. "We're closed," she said. "You're done for the night." She put her fingers to the hood. The metal was tepid, neither cold nor convincingly warm. The temperature of things that sit out and choose their own hour. The board's letters blinked and then held steady in a fitful compromise. Foamy. She took that as a joke offered by the dark and did not laugh at it. Behind her, a horn blew one polite note. The waiting cars at the gate had seen movement and misread it. Ria turned and held both arms out wide in a gesture you would use to keep a dog from knocking over a child without scolding either one. She heard her westbound unit crackle in. Sierra 4, we've got 3 at the west gate so far. Advising hold. Copy your situation? Copy, she said. I'm in the chute with a display vehicle. Nobody moves. The pickup's board changed. The letters dropped away and were replaced by an arrow, left pointing, the move used to tell a line to merge around the hazard. In this geometry there was nowhere to go but forward, and forward was the hazard. The arrow did not know that. Or it knew and would not admit it. The amber arrow blinked in time with her heart, until her heart decided the arrow was a better metronome. The Haar's chime came again, amplified by the walls. Pilot car at midspan, the voice said cheerfully. Hold oncoming traffic. Wait at your gate. Do not enter the work zone. In the face of a voice that was wrong and a vehicle that meant well without a driver, Ria did the thing that had earned her a 3-year stripe and the good graces of the older sergeants. She slowed everything down even more. She keyed her mic. Dispatch. I need the dynamic sign at the summit. Post road closed east of mile 60. 2 until dawn. And I need black and whites. At both ends. To babysit the fence. Copy, dispatch said. Sign updated. Units in place in 6. She took 2 steps closer to the pickup and reached inside the cab. The key turned under her hand. It did not fight or resist. It simply rolled back to off. The dash went dark. The amber board hesitated, then dimmed, then went out. The letters remained visible, a heartbeat longer than the bulbs should have allowed, like after images on eyelids. Silence came down like a lid, not unpleasant, just complete. The river turned its pages below. A pebble hit a plate with a friendly tick and bounced off into the dark. Ria rested her hand on the roof of the truck the way you touch the flank of a horse to let it know you mean to pass around its back. Okay, she said softly. Okay. When she turned to walk back toward the gate, the pickup rolled forward 1 inch against the weight of gravity and stopped, as if it had decided to make sure the plates were covered by just that much more vehicle. She left it there. She backed up, reporting calmly into the radio, the words and accounting that anyone could understand. Unauthorized vehicle, no operator, hazard mitigated, maintaining closure. At the gate, the first driver waited exactly as asked. His hands had shifted to a more comfortable place on the wheel. His jaw had eased. He smiled at her when she came into his headlights. Thought we were going, he said. He looked embarrassed to have wanted to. We're closed, she said. You'll want to turn around and use the old road down the valley. Adds 20 minutes. You'll be happier. You got it, officer. 2 more cars arrived. Then a 4th. Her westbound partner announced a small queue on his side too. Ria let one at a time turn in a slow, patient ballet. The Haar remained polite and wrong, repeating the schedule like prayer. 1/4 hour, 3/4, follow at 15. People rolled their windows down and asked the old questions. She answered them with humor and steady hands. The mountain shook out a pebble now and then. The stars were bitten by the canyon walls and remade into new arrangements and strips. DOT rolled up from town with the look of men who had been pulled out of dreams they did not mind leaving. The foreman's clipboard had a duct-tape spine and a pencil tucked so tight in the clip it had learned its groove. He looked at the gate, the waiting cars, the white pickup inside the chute. He squinted at the board, at the neatly ghosted lettering on the door. He looked like someone looking at a face they should know and could not place with a name. We don't have a unit logged to the mountain tonight, he said. Nobody was supposed to be up here but you. Haar's unplugged. I can take you down to the yard and show you the trailer's cord in a coil. But he tipped his chin toward the pickup. That is the old style. Haven't run one of those since the county 12 days. Ria nodded at the white paint where a badge had been. I figured. The foreman called a name that had the right dusty syllables for a person who knew these hills. Malin, he said to the air, half sheepish, half friendly, as if you call to something as both hello and apology. He walked past the gate with the careful step of someone who respects K-Rail and the world it protects. He put his hand on the pickup's hood and did exactly what she had done. Turned the key. It was already off. He checked the board power at the back, the plug neat in its socket. He flicked the switch. Nothing. He checked under the truck and came back up with a smile that had little humor and much acknowledgement. "Batteries in, lines are old, everything's wrong and right at once," he said quietly. "Who's Malin?" Rhea asked, because that's what there was to ask. "Old hand," he said. "Loved this job, loved that board, loved the show of a thing done safely. Used to run convoys in weather so thin you could hear the river read names out of its echo, you know. He'd set that sign and drive like a metronome. Retired a few years back. Didn't want to party. Left that truck parked by the chain link like a dog that won't come in. He didn't say anything about what happened after. Maybe there was nothing to say. Maybe saying it would have turned the night into a story that coveted applause." The foreman just nodded at the plates and the netting. "Mountain's been opinionated lately. By 3:15, the queues had been turned around and taught other paths. The dynamic sign at the summit blinked its clear instruction. The har, if she tuned to it, was static again. A plain hiss like someone sleeping down the hall. The white pickup sat on the plates like a little, quiet bridge made of a promise. They left it there until daylight because that seemed to be the arrangement. When the sun lifted, the crews moved it without comment, rolling it backward with a winch and a chain and a set of coordinated gestures that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with respect. The foreman put his hand on the roof once, an unconscious pat. "Thanks," he said to no one they could see. In her report, Rhea wrote the useful parts. She logged the hang-ups and the wrong broadcast and the vehicle without an operator. She wrote that she entered the work zone on foot and ensured no motorists did. She wrote that no one was hurt. At the bottom, where the narrative box asked for additional remarks, she typed nothing for a long while, and then added, "Advisory provided by unknown source. Closure maintained. Roadway held." For the next few weeks, on nights when the canyon's breath came off the slope in a specific cool way, she tuned 1,610 for a minute, at the top of the hour, half for superstition, half for company. Sometimes it was only static. Once, at 2:45, the voice played she could not name, and she listened without changing her face. "Pilot car departing West Gate." It said in a tone that had calmed strangers 100 times. "Please form a single file. Do not stop in the chute." She didn't move her car. She set her hand on the wheel a little lighter, as if holding a small bird. She watched through the curve at the place where the plates began, and she saw nothing to follow except the idea that someone who had liked his work very much might still be doing a version of it when the mountain asked for help. That was its own kind of comfort. If you were the kind of person who spends nights making sure nobody mistakes a sign for an invitation when it's actually a suggestion to wait. Story number 6. The old turnpike plaza at mile 89 had the posture of a retired animal, big, purposeful, and finally at rest. The cash lanes were gone, their arm gates removed, their toll baskets taken down. What remained was a broad canopy, a chessboard of concrete islands, and the ghost of a routine that had once made midnight drivers count out quarters. The state had gone cashless 2 years earlier. Overhead gantries took the snapshots now. The plaza sat with its windows black and its booths empty, waiting for demolition or reuse, whichever the budget chose first. Officer Eli Ramos liked the mile anyway. It was a place where the freeway widened and then narrowed again, and in the widening something like silence lived. Trucks downshifted there, as if remembering to be polite. Locals who had never liked the tolls still glanced to the side out of habit, hands moving to pockets that no longer needed coins. The big sign over the canopy read, "No cash, keep moving," a message that had been true for so many nights it felt like a charm rather than an instruction. The night was clear and dry. A late summer breeze moved dust along the shoulder in a low, stubborn stripe. The radio was in that lull between the last diner closing and the first bakery delivery, the time when even the most talkative troopers held their peace. Eli let the cruiser idle through the mile at the right lane, scanning for debris, for stray swerves, for that one driver who mistakes an empty place for an invitation to be inventive. Dispatch pinged his tablet with a minor alert. Back-end system flagged 3 toll reads at mile 80. 9 cash lanes, no camera images, source unknown. It wasn't the sort of thing that needed lights. It was the sort of thing that asked a person with a badge to go look and then send an email. Eli touched the mic. District 12, Sierra 1. 7 at the old plaza. I'll check the flags. How romantic, dispatch said, half asleep and friendly. It says the cash sensors aren't even plugged in. Call if your quarters start rattling. He smiled at the empty windshield. The canopy loomed, its underside square with old fluorescent fixtures that had been unplugged so long they looked like fossils. The booths sat like small houses. In their windows, he caught the moving reflection of his own light bar in lazy blue. Then, a lane to his left blinked green. Not the new overhead gantry, not the big sign. The little indicator light over lane 4, the kind that used to tell drivers which booths were open, flicked alive. It was the color of summer leaves, not the harsh LED green of the modern era. It glowed, held for 2 heartbeats, then went dark. He pulled to the shoulder and stopped. The plaza was all right angles and shadow. His headlights washed across the concrete islands and carved the emptiness into manageable pieces. Lane 4 blinked green again. He could see dust in the air like thin breath, the light catching each particle and making it hang for a second before it moved on. "Dispatch," he said, careful to keep his voice even. "Lane indicator in the old plaza is showing green intermittently. Might have a power bleed. I'm going to walk the booths." "Copy," dispatch said. "Pemberton Plaza still shows dead on Dot's grid. Want me to call maintenance?" "Stand by." Eli stepped out and let the night settle around his shoulders. The plaza had a smell, warm concrete, a hint of tar from patches no one would bother to patch again, and the faint sweetness of old paper, as if someone had opened a file drawer and then shut it without doing any harm. He crossed to lane 4 under the canopy. The green bulb over the lane flicked, once as he came close and stayed lit. Steady now, the soft kind a person's eyes trust without deciding to. The booth's glass was clean enough to see through. Inside, a counter waited for hands. A metal drawer sat closed, the kind that slid under the glass for change to pass safely. A stool rested under the counter, chrome legs thin and dignified. On the ledge, a square object sat wrapped in brown paper and held with string. It looked recent only because it didn't have the dust the rest of the booth wore like a coat. Eli let his flashlight lie at a low angle. The beam skimmed the lane and made the old painted arrows glow like fish in a pond. The tiny sensor cut into the pavement, the one that used to trigger a vehicle present, was still there, an inert rectangle like a scar. The lane's signal face had the old X and arrow arrangement. Red X for closed, green arrow for open. It was dark. Only the small square bulb above the booth said go. A compact sedan eased off the main line in response. The driver, acting on a reflex older than the sign over the road, turned into lane 4, as if he had been on this route in another year, and was finally home. Eli raised a hand and stepped into the lane. He smiled in a way that said, "Nothing is wrong. This is just a conversation." The driver rolled the window down a few inches, confused but polite. "Is this not open?" he said, eyes flicking to the cheerful green above his head. "Keep moving through," Eli said gently, gesturing to the empty aisle beyond. "No stopping under the canopy. It's retired." The driver nodded, sheepish. He rolled forward, glancing once at the empty booth, as if expecting a person to tap on the glass and ask for exact change. He merged back onto the open highway, with the careful weight of someone not wanting to appear embarrassed. The green light went dark. From somewhere inside the booth came the softest sound, like paper sliding across paper. Eli stepped to the window, cupped a hand to block his own headlight's glare, and peered in again. The square wrapped package sat where it had been. It had a tag on one side he hadn't noticed. A piece of torn index card with a name in block letters, L. Baines. Under it, 2 words. Lane 4. He checked the door. Locked. The key his department carried didn't match these older locks. Maintenance had kept a set, but had left to the day shift any question that involved unlocking old glass. He circled to the back of the booth anyway. The service door was the same old rectangle, the paint weathered to a soft, tired shine. He knocked once with his knuckle out of a courtesy even he couldn't explain. The tiny room inside gave him no sound back. Something far down the highway honked twice. A trucker greeting a friend. A code on a CB. The plaza took the sound and made it hum. "District 12, he said. "Do we have a contact for the old plaza maintenance? I've got an object in a booth that shouldn't be there." "Copy. Stand by." Dispatch's keyboard whispers were a form of weather. A minute later. "Nearest is the overnight supervisor at Turnpike Ops. Name is Hargreaves." "I'll ring him." Cars hissed through the outer lanes, tires sounding like wind through coarse grass. The new gantries half a mile beyond where Eli stood flashed the invisible. 1,000 small readings layered into one clean sentence for billing later. Here, under the canopy, the world was older and uncounted. Lane 4's green popped on again. Overhead, the old speaker horn mounted on the booth, something that once carried a human voice to help distracted drivers, crackled like static catching its breath. A gentle, professional tone spoke 8 words. Exact change only. Please have your toll ready. The voice was warm and unhurried, as if cash were still king. As if a person behind glass still made change by feel and knew the regulars' faces. Eli felt the small hairs at the back of his neck rise, then settle as training caught his mind and told it everything around him had explanations eventually. He rested his forearm on the sill and put his face near the little round speaker grill in the glass. Operations, he said evenly, as if answering a radio call from a colleague. Plazas closed. The speaker crackled. A soft click on, off, like someone testing a mic. Then, quietly, Lane 4 stays open until the book is done. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't stubborn. It sounded like a rule in a manual that had kept traffic from collapsing into a mess for years. Eli looked down at the wrapped package on the ledge. The tag looked new because the edges were not yet curled. He could read the pencil line, L. Baines. Lane 4. He recognized the name the same way he recognized road names on sign plates he'd never driven through repetition, passed down in conversation. Baines had been a lane lead a decade back, a person older troopers mentioned with a nod when talking about the plaza's rhythm. Always fast, always fair. Could count a roll of quarters by the sound it made. Headlights swung into lane 5 and then corrected, veering back out to the open main line. Farther down the canopy, the red X over lane 7 flickered dimly, then died. The wind ticked a loose sign against its bracket. A sedan with out-of-state plates drifted toward lane 4. Eli stepped into the lane again, gentle. He guided them through with palms up steadiness. As they passed, the driver held out a toll ticket, the old kind, thick as a playing card. Eli saw it clearly in the beam, pale yellow cardstock with a list of exits and prices. He couldn't help the smile that lifted one corner of his mouth. "You're good," he said. "No cash tonight. Keep moving." The driver glanced at the ticket, then at the empty booth, then at Eli. "I found this in the visor," he said, baffled, but content to have someone tell him what to do. The car slid on. Hargreaves called dispatch back. Eli took the patch on his handset. "Ops," the man said, voice shaped by coffee and 1,000 midnights. "You got a light on in there?" "Lane 4 indicators showing green," Eli said. "Speaker's got a voice. Old Baines used to wire those greens to a separate circuit when the main threw a fit." Hargreaves said, "No nonsense. Not yet spooked. Kept things moving when the board glitched. Power should be dead, though. We pulled it when the changeover happened." He paused. And in the pause, there was a recognition of a line between what he could fix and what he could not. "You want me to come out?" "Not yet," Eli said. "Let me keep eyes here." He glanced up at the green bulb. It seemed brighter, as if someone had put a hand over it to test the heat and warmed it. In the corner of the plaza, the old violation camera, an olive drab box with a round glass eye, ticked softly. Its shutter didn't fire. It made the sound lenses make when they remember they can move. Eli's spotlight found it and held. Dust motes drifted in the beam like eraser shavings. District 12, another unit called in. Casual, from miles away. "Anybody else hearing faint tones around 8, 9? Sounds like an old radio test." "Affirmative," dispatch said dryly, too used to odd to be unkind. "Ramos is on scene. If you hear a toll collector ask you for exact change, give him the fax number." Another green blink, then stillness. The wrapped package behind the glass caught Eli's eye again. He pulled his phone and used the camera as a lazy magnifier. The brown paper had a logo faintly stamped into it. Pemberton Turnpike Authority. A script that predated the new blocky state emblem. Under the string, a corner of carbon paper peeped out, peacock blue dulled by age. He should have left it, he knew. He should have stood and watched and waited for someone with the right key. Instead, he circled back to his car, fetched a Slim Jim, and returned to the service door. He wasn't breaking and entering. He was entering a space the state owned, because the state owned all of this. Still, he slid the Slim Jim with the care of someone picking a memory rather than a lock. The latch lifted, and the door opened with a sigh and the faintest breath of cooler air. Inside, it was not eerie so much as cramped. The stool. The counter. A small fan mounted in the corner that hadn't spun in 10 years. A radio on a shelf, with its power cord cut. A ledger book lay on the counter, open to a page midway. Tally marks marched in neat columns. In the lines where someone had once written a date and a shift number, a pencil had pressed so reliably that the paper had learned a groove. At the top of the page in tidy print, Lane 4 Baines. He lifted the wrapped package. It weighed less than he expected. The string cut a faint line in the paper, the way string does when it has waited too long to be untied. He didn't peel it back. He held it a second longer, then placed it carefully where it had been. Beside the ledger, a receipt printer slept. He touched the feed, a half-inch of white paper pushed out with a professional competence the machine had no right to possess. On the blank slip, words appeared in pale gray, like a pencil rubbing. Lane 4. Open when needed. Do not strand them. That was all. No timestamp. No header. No price. He folded the slip into his pocket, not because he had a plan for it, but because sometimes paper is a kind of anchor. He stepped out of the booth and shut the door behind him, locking it because that was the tidy thing to do. A pair of box trucks approached in tandem. Their drivers had the look of men who had driven long enough to let their bodies do the work while their minds hummed a separate, pleasant hum. The first veered toward Lane 4, blinked, corrected in time, and rolled under the no cash sign as if nothing unusual had happened. The second's blinker ticked twice. An old reflex meeting an old green. Eli clapped his palm against the hood of the second truck as it crept into Lane 4, friendly but firm. The driver stopped, surprised. Eli pointed to the open main line, gestured big. The driver smiled, put up a hand in apology, merged back out. The green bulb overhead, perhaps shamed by being ignored, flicked off. In its place, for half a second, the red X above the lane stuttered to life, an outdated scold. The speaker chirped. "Fast quarters on the left," the voice said. Then, as if hearing itself and finding the century wrong, it softened to a whisper. "Keep moving. Please keep moving." He kept them moving. For the next 20 minutes, he stood under the canopy and became a kind of shepherd. He held his arms in familiar ways. He smiled at drivers who didn't know why they wanted to slow down. He thanked the night when it obeyed. Lane 4's green came and went, less like a malfunction now, and more like someone tapping a finger on a desk to a beat only they knew. Each time, a car considered the lane, then took the open road instead, guided by his hands and his calm face. From the far lane, a flash of white fluttered down in the edge of his vision. He walked over. A toll ticket lay near the storm drain grate. Heavy parchment, soft around the corners, its print so fine it seemed taken from a museum. Eli picked it up. On the back in blue ink someone had written, in ballpoint letters that leaned forward the way confident words do, "Last book tonight. Thank you for being patient." He turned it over. The list of exits on the front included names that had been changed years earlier. The kind the public got used to only under protest. West Spur, Parkview, Quarry Road. The new ones lived in green reflection above the highway now, mentions of memorial names and corporate donors. Here, under the canopy, the old names were still themselves. At 3:1, the plaza settled. The green blinked once more, a soft farewell. The speaker whispered, more breath than voice. Lane 4. Closed. The bulb went with it. The canopy seemed to let out a breath, a structural sigh as the night cooled steel at a rate steel likes. Hargreaves called back, more awake now, the sound of a truck cab in his voice. "You still want me?" he asked. "Not necessary," Eli said. He told the story without embroidery. Green light, voice, a wrapped package, a note on a slip of receipt paper. Hargreaves listened like a man holding a tin cup under a tap, and taking exactly as much as was offered. At the end, he made a noise that might have been a laugh and might have been respect. Baines ran 4 like a church, he said. Kept it open in blizzards when the hand valve froze on the outer lanes. Never stranded anybody at 3 in the morning when they'd been driving too long, and the only thing keeping them between the lines was a routine. He paused. You get them through? Nobody stopped, Eli said. Nobody hit a concrete island. That's a win. Copy that, Hargreaves said. Send me a picture of that package if you can. We'll come out at sunup and lock it all again, ceremonially or otherwise. Eli took a photo through the glass. The camera caught the string, the tag, the neatness of something wrapped by someone who believed in neatness. He sent it and put his phone away. He walked the length of the canopy one more time and touched the concrete island at the far end like a person patting a railing. Then he stepped back into his cruiser and merged into the smooth dark that had swallowed up the minor oddity like a pond taking a small stone. In his CAD narrative, he typed, Observed intermittent legacy indicator at decommissioned toll plaza. Diverted motorists to main line. Secured scene. No incidents. Later, in the notes he kept for himself and never gave to a supervisor, because there was nothing to be gained and nothing to be argued, he wrote, Some systems do not like to stop mid-book. At dawn, when he rolled west toward the district office, the sun found the canopy's edges and made them bright, the kind of brightness that makes even derelict things look noble. A maintenance truck sat on the shoulder. Hargreaves stood at lane 4 with a man in a vest, both of them holding coffee like a new idea. They had the wrapped package out on the counter behind the glass, careful not to disturb the string. He saw them open it like people open a letter. Later that afternoon, an email followed him through his day like a polite child. It was from Hargreaves. A photo of the package's contents sat in the body of the message. A book of toll tickets bound in a strip of cardboard, the last of them stamped with the word void. On top of the book lay a paperclip holding a handwritten note. The note said, Lane lead Baines last night. Leave lane 4 green for stragglers. If nobody comes by 3, lock it. The paper had yellowed to a deep cream. The handwriting had not faded at all. No one wrote a report about that. There was no field in any database to enter it. The plaza would be torn down in winter, they said, made into a median with shrubs. But that night and the next, Eli slowed a little as he passed mile 89. He watched lane 4. He saw nothing, which was the kind of good story his job liked best. He kept his hands at 10 and 2, let the cruiser hum, and felt for a second that the job he did moving trouble, instead of waiting for it to happen, had been done here before, in a way that had nothing to do with citations and everything to do with keeping a promise to strangers. At 3 in the morning a week later, on a different stretch, a voice came over an unrelated radio channel, faint and cheerful and resigned. Exact, change only. It made a few of the older troopers smile, and a few of the younger ones glance at their dashboards. It didn't matter which ones had stories to go with the words. Traffic moved. The night held. Story number 7. Cedar Hollow Tunnel sat under the ridge like a long-held note. 2 bores, tiled in old white and gray, ran east to west through the mountain's middle, each with a raised footpath and blue-painted doors spaced along the wall. In daylight, the cars moved through with a chorus of tire hiss and AM radio static. At night, the sound thinned to a single line. The fans in the ventilation chamber rotated with the patience of windmills, drawing the mountain's breath and giving it back clean. Officer Malik Price knew this mile better than he knew most rooms. He knew the way the tile seams made a dotted line along the wall, the way the expansion joints in the floor sang a soft note when a heavy vehicle passed. He knew where the old advisory signs sat, the small rectangles that told drivers to tune to 530 AM for updates. And he knew that, most nights, 530 AM gave nothing but a blank hum, like a fridge in a dark kitchen. It had been a quiet shift of the kind the night gives when it forgives you for a while. A deer grazing the shoulder and then thinking better of it, a trucker with a loose strap, a sedan that drifted once and then woke up and kept to its lane. The sky wore no moon. The ridge wore stars like pins. Down in the valley, porch lights made their own constellations. At 1:57 AM, as he passed the east portal, Malik's radio picked up a tone from nowhere, a low, polite chime that made him glance at the advisory sign out of habit. The sign's small bulb lit in a soft, old-fashioned way. Tune radio to 530 AM. For info, it said, the letters glowing like they still trusted incandescent glass more than modern pixels. He reached over and turned the AM knob on the cruiser's console, feeling the small detents click under his fingers like a safe dial. Static opened like a curtain. Under it, a voice came through, recorded but alive, the cadence of a person trained to speak into a microphone that fed through tile and steel. Cedar Hollow Tunnel Advisory, the voice said. Reduced speed. Keep right. Use headlights. If disabled, proceed to nearest blue door and wait in the cross passage. Do not stop in the travel lane. He keyed his shoulder mic without taking his eyes off the portal's mouth. Dispatch, Sierra 9. Advisory radio at Cedar is broadcasting. You seeing any alerts on the tunnel systems? Negative on alerts, dispatch said, a little surprised. Ventilation operator is off until 4. No tests scheduled. Do you need the on-call? Stand by, Malik said. He slowed and slid his cruiser to the shoulder just inside the portal. The tile made his headlights into a soft, pretending daylight. Moisture gave the tunnel that clean cave smell. Concrete, old detergents, the ghost of brake dust that lived in the grout. The fans hummed at their nighttime, setting a low wind with purpose. 50 yards in, a minivan rested in the right lane with its hazards ticking. The lights flashed a good, steady tempo. The rear bench was down under a pile of blankets. A child's head leaned against a pillow. The driver's door stood open as if the driver had meant to step out, and then been persuaded not to by the night. Malik set his rear deck to amber and brought the slow pattern up, the one that says, watch your hands, it's all right, nothing is exploding. He put the cruiser at a protective angle and clicked his PA on low. Driver of the van, he said in the calm theater voice he'd learned for tunnels. Leave the vehicle in park and step to the footpath by the wall. We'll talk there. The driver did as asked, grateful before he even spoke. He was in his 30s with a face that wanted sleep and a voice that still had good manners in it. I lost power, he said. It cut out. Then the dash came back. Then it went again. My boy heard a phone and said to go to a blue door. I didn't want to leave the car in the lane. It's okay, Malik said. He glanced over the van, noting the aftermarket bike rack and the way condensation drifted from the tailpipe in a fine ribbon. Diagnostic thoughts stacked themselves in the back of his head and then stepped politely aside. We're going to make this simple. Up ahead, the tile threw back a dim flicker in waves, as if a farther set of lights were struggling to decide whether to be brave. The advisory voice on 530 AM paused, then came again, as if cued by a hand. Walk to cross passage E, it said. Wait for assistance. Remain calm. Do not cross into the opposite bore unless directed. The tone carried the unhurried authority of a person who has said these words on the worst day, and on the testing day, and on the day when nothing happened at all. I'll take you to a cross passage, Malik told the driver. He looked past him to the minivan's rear bench. 2 kids were bundled there with blankets up to their noses, watching him with the open trust of children who understand when a uniform belongs to a helper. Grab 1 blanket for each and your phone. We'll be on the other side of a door in 30 seconds. The blue door nearest them wore a stencil, E4. The paint had scuffs at shin height where people had bumped through with bags. The metal of the handle shone where hands had polished it through habit. Malik tried it, expecting the usual stiffness. It opened with a neat, magnetic release. Inside, the cross passage smelled like concrete when rain is near. The walls were plain, the floor clean, the other blue door at the far end labeled E4 in a matching hand. Midway along, an alcove held a bright casing around an emergency phone, its handset attached to a curly cord like the tail of a well-fed cat. A sign above the phone read, Tunnel Control. A second line read, If no response, wait, help en route. Malik guided the family inside. The father whispered thanks in a line that could have been a prayer. The child, holding a stuffed animal taller than his own torso, lifted the toy in a small salute. Malik smiled with his eyes and made his voice cheerful, because sometimes tone is all that matters. Listen for the click of the door, he said. It'll sound like a car locking. That's how you know it's latched. Stay here. I'll be right outside with my car. He watched the door close on them with a soft, convincing clunk. He checked his radio. Dispatch, I've placed a family in cross passage E4. Minivan disabled. I'm holding the right lane. Any units closer to the west portal? Negative. You're alone inside for 9 minutes to back up. Do you want the tunnel on? Call? Affirmative, Malik said, and the dispatch voice did its quiet work contacting the person who would be blinking at a ringtone in an apartment across the valley. The tunnel's sound changed the way a room changes when a heater kicks on. Air moved with more intent. Malik felt it in his jacket first, then in the small hairs on his forearms. The ventilation fans were stepping up. Overhead, a long duct ran the length of the bore, louvered openings every 100 feet. He saw the van's hazard flash for a moment, then dim, as if something had drunk the light down. His CO detector, clipped to his vest as policy demanded in enclosed structures, stayed in its normal, stubborn quiet. The readout winked a calm 0. From the west, a pair of headlights glowed in the curve. The tunnel made distance deceitful. Everything seemed both closer and farther than it was. The headlights rose and fell the bounce of a truck's suspension. Malik eased left, set his palm up in a big, slow stop, and then gestured the lane around the van as if conducting a polite parade. The trucker saw the arrangement, eased into the left lane with a small flare of signal, and gave the tunnel the gift of not being a problem. The advisory voice came again, not loud, not bossy. Reduced visibility ahead, it said. Maintain spacing. Do not stop. Malik glanced up along the ceiling. At E6, the light at the top of the blue door's frame flickered once, then steadied. A sound arrived that did not belong. It was small, a gentle clatter like a bicycle pedal catching a curb. It came from behind the east portal. Malik looked in his mirror and saw a shape too small and too quick to be a car, cutting along the footpath, a dim blad of light dancing in its wake. He clicked the siren in that short cough he liked for tunnels and put his voice through the PA again. Bicycle, stop. Walk the tunnel. You cannot ride in here. The rider, contrite even from here, dismounted and moved with a sideways crab walk that looked embarrassed but compliant. Tunnels do that to people. Make them do the right thing without turning it into an argument. The blue phone in the cross passage trilled, an old-fashioned ring with a softness to it, as if it had been turned down by a considerate hand. Malik stepped into the passage, lifted the handset, and said, "Price?" "Highway Patrol. Tunnel Control," a voice said. It sounded like paper and coffee, like a room with maps on the walls. "We've got a dead van at E4. Good spot. Keep them in the passage. Hold eastbound for 30 seconds when I tell you, and tell the minivan not to try to restart. Control isn't staffed at night," Malik said. Not as a correction, more as an observation. "Tonight it is," the voice said, as if that explained it. "Hold for 30. Malik stepped out and stood with his palm to the traffic. The tunnel accepted his hand and held its cars like a baker holding dough ready to slide into an oven calm, with respect for timing. He watched the van, its roof wet with condensation that looked like a sheen. He watched the line of tile lights lay their weak halos across the ceiling. He listened with his boots for vibrations other than his own. The big fans deepened a note. There's a sound old steel makes when it spins up, no screech, no grind, just a pitch that climbs until it finds the note it was made to hold. The air along the wall cut cleaner. On the ceiling, one of the louvers opened a fraction. Malik smelled something then that made him grateful for clean air, the warm breath of a vehicle that had been laboring a little too long. The tunnel's belly took it away. "Clear," the same voice said into his ear, as if no time had passed. "Let them go." He dropped his hand, and the line moved with gratitude. A hatchback that had been waiting took a breath, leaned right, and slipped past the van like a dancer crossing stage. The truck that followed used its mirror kindly, and gave him a wave he couldn't return because both his hands were engaged in being calm. A second sound arrived then, louder, flat, pressing. It was not siren or horn. It was the slap-slap of a trailer on imperfect pavement, the sound of mass traveling through a space that isn't its true home. The tunnel had a grade so subtle, you felt it only when you rolled a marble it fell west to east by a whisper. A semi had entered at the west, not fast, but maybe tired, maybe vivid in its sense of being almost done. In that loop of white tile and sound, speed confuses. "West end, hold," Malik said into the mic out of habit, even though he knew no one was there to hold for him in that exact moment. He lifted both hands. It is a universal gesture in a tunnel. A man under tile, palms up, asking traffic for grace. The semi's headlights raked the curve, blinked past girders, and came into the straight. Malik could see the driver's hands, light on the wheel. He could see the line of his jaw pointed at attention. He could see the faint bob of the hood, how it spoke of brakes doing their job and perhaps a bit of heat. The truck moved into the left lane with precision and hummed by. The trailer's side casting a moving night against tile. The advisory voice, patient as weather, came again through 530 AM. "Cross, passage E," it said, in the tone of an elementary teacher lining up a row of children. "You're doing fine." Unknown to Malik, back in the minivan, the older child had his ear against the door, with the studiousness of someone who has learned listening has rewards. He heard the voice through the door at half volume. He decided that a blue door that talks is a good door. The tunnel on call called Malik's portable. "This is Elena from maintenance," she said, not breathless but awake now. "I'm 10 out. The control room shows an advisory broadcast flagged, even though nobody keyed the system. You reading that too?" "Affirmative," Malik said. He watched the traffic thin and felt the tunnel shift from the kind of busy that makes coordination important to the kind of quiet that makes you grateful for a good shoulder. The minivan's driver peered through the small window in the cross-passage door. He saw Malik's reflective chevrons and the way people tend to stand when they've decided the world will be orderly whether it likes it or not. He tapped the glass with a knuckle, a tiny question. Malik tapped back, the way you do to a child at an aquarium. He walked to the blue door and cracked it to speak, letting only a sliver of tunnel air in. "You're okay," he said. "In 5 minutes we'll have a tow roll to push you out. You will hear fans get louder. That's normal. They're moving the old air out." The younger child asked in a whisper meant to be big, "Who's talking on the phone? Is it the tunnel?" "It might be," Malik said. "Good," the child said, with the absolute certainty of someone who has slept in a moving car and learned to trust the hum. When he went back to the lane, the tunnel had that freshly shaken snow globe clarity it gets after a fan cycle. The tile looked brighter. The breath was easier. His detector on his vest winked along at its calm 0. For a moment, the cross-passage door next to E4, E5 glowed an extra shade of blue, as if the paint had found a new light. He chalked it up to a bulb behind a lens. The radio hissed. A new voice fell across the channel at an angle, not on their frequency but bleeding in from somewhere adjacent. "Hollow control to patrol," it said in a timbre that felt borrowed from an older decade. "Stand by for stop board cycle at East Portal. Hold your lane for 18 seconds. It was the second time tonight clear instruction delivered with the soft confidence of an office without windows. "Copy," Malik said, to no one his radio could point to. He walked out to the portal, letting the tunnel's slow slope pull him along. At the mouth, the big modern dynamic message board over the lane blinked awake. Stop glowed in white against red, the letters sharp. The timer in the corner, the one used during the rare reversible lane operations, counted down from 18 with the steady certainty of a metronome. Traffic on the approach slowed in a ripple, as if obeying a red light that had not existed 1 second before. The stop held, then slid to slow, then went blank. A crossover from the maintenance yard showed then a white flatbed tow with a cheerful strobe. Elena from maintenance leaned out and gave him a small salute that said, "See? Here I am." They worked in silence, and in simple words. Angle the wheel, push back, straighten up, easy, easy. The minivan came to life under the tow's influence without complaint, and found the shoulder at the portal as if it had chosen it. Malik walked the family out. The child with the tall stuffed animal gave the cross-passage door a pat on the way, as if thanking a pal. The father shook Malik's hand with relief that took the weight off his shoulders. "Someone said the door number," he said, confused but grateful. "We wouldn't have known. We didn't want to go down that hallway." "That's what it's for," Malik said. He meant the words to apply to more than the concrete. Elena looked across the tile at the blue door labels, her face tilted into the way people look at something they think they know, and now suspect has other layers. "Control isn't staffed at night," she said softly, not as a challenge, more as a line from a manual remembering itself out loud. "The advisory shouldn't be broadcasting. The stop board shouldn't cycle without me." "Yet," Malik said. "Yet," she answered. She walked to the emergency phone in the cross-passage alcove and lifted the handset. Her eyes slid to the tiny print where the line's number lived. She listened a long second. "Dead," she said as expected. "But you heard it ring." "We did." She replaced the handset with the mild attention of someone who expects a cat to do tricks when the house is empty. She looked up at the ceiling where the louvers breathed. "One of the old operators used to mark the doors with letters for kids," she said. "He read a study that said letters are easier than numbers in a panic. He put E for East, W for West. Some nights he came in when he wasn't scheduled because he liked the fans." She smiled at the absurdity, and then didn't walk it back. "Little rituals keep places calm." Malik nodded. The tunnel hummed in a way that felt exactly like a big animal content that its blanket had been straightened. He finished the paperwork under the wake of dawn, sitting at the turnout looking back at the portal. In his narrative he wrote, "Disabled vehicle moved. Family escorted to cross passage. Ventilation cycle. Maintained lane. Tow cleared. No injuries." He did not write that a voice told him to count to 18. He did not write that blue paint looked close to luminous for a heartbeat. He did not write that his AM radio had learned a sentence a decade newer than itself. After the sun melted the tunnel's glow back into everyday light, he drove through one more time. The advisory sign at the mouth slept. The blue door at E4 was an ordinary door again. The emergency phone sat with the nonchalance of a worker who had not been called in weeks. On the footpath, near the base of the wall by E4, he found a small laminated card face down. He turned it over. It was a map, simple lines. A child's sort of diagram showing a tunnel bore with little squares for doors, each labeled with a letter. In the bottom corner, text in a friendly font read, "In an emergency, walk to the nearest blue door." A line below it read, "Tunnel control. Press once to connect." The back of the card had a name printed small, L. Franzen, Operations. The edges were worn not by weather but by fingers. He left it with Elena, who put it in her pocket with care, as if she had been given back a button she'd lost from a favorite coat. Nights came and went. Sometimes, when traffic thinned and his eyes did that settling thing that says everything is okay for 5 miles, he tuned 530 AM just to see if the hum was still only hum. Most nights it was. Once, he heard the chime and the calm voice. "If you are between E7 and E9, wait where you are." No one was. It felt like someone checking the locks. He kept his hands steady and his eyes awake, and, on the nights when the tunnel sounded like a far-off ocean in a shell, he said a small thank you to whatever shifts air and tile and routine into alignment. Some places keep their operators even when the budget says they're off. Not as ghosts with taste for drama, but as the memory a structure has of the people who cared for it. On those nights, a blue door glows a little, and an AM voice says stand by, and a patrol car holds its lane out like a hand to strangers, and the tunnel does what it was built to do, carry people through. Story number 8. The low bridge on County 12 was older than the highway beneath it, a squat railroad span with steel ribs, and a painted warning that had been refreshed so many times the numbers looked handmade. 11-6, in tall white digits, low clearance stenciled twice, and a pair of yellow advance beacons a mile back that used to wake up the sleepy drivers before their roofs tried to argue with iron. The state had added a truck route with a generous sweeping turn. The old overheight chains that once clanged on roofs were taken down last winter, their noise replaced by tidy LED signs and a beam sensor that should have slept through the night like everything else. Officer Naomi Patel liked the mile anyway. The creosote smell from the ties came down on cool air. Night trains sometimes rolled over slow enough that each axle ticked like a clock. Headlights met the bridge and turned under it with a brief, careful bow. If she parked at the pullout where the dirt widened, she could see the approach beacons, the truck route sign, and the low black mouth of the underpass all at once. It was the kind of geometry she trusted. Angles that told the truth, space you could measure. At 2:09, a red bloom lit the trees a mile up one of the advance beacons, flashing its overheight warning. Naomi sat up, checked her mirror, and thumbed the mic. District 5, Sierra 14. Overheight beacon just tripped on County 12 eastbound. Copy, dispatch said, drowsy moving to alert. Systems flagged offline at night. Could be a bird or a bad sensor. Heading up, she said. She rolled forward as the second beacon lit in echoed red. The sign below it cycled through its simple language. Overheight. Take truck route. Do not enter. Ahead, the low bridge waited like a threshold. A long RV came into view, tall and glossy, towing a rental box trailer that added just enough inches to make Naomi's hands want to lift into a halt before her mouth did. The RV's turn signal came on late. A single blink at the truck route arrow, then hesitated. She hit her whoop once, the kind that tickles the spine without scaring hearts, and angled the cruiser across the gore with the easy block she'd practiced 100 times. The RV stopped a car length shy of the paint. In her ear, soft and as if spoken into a room where the speaker didn't want to wake anyone, a voice said, "Hold them for the freight." Naomi glanced at her radio. Her channel showed only her unit and dispatch. The voice hadn't climbed through any speaker she owned. "Dispatch? Confirm rail schedule?" she asked anyway. No published freight between 2 and 3, dispatch said. "Yard shows a local at 4. You got eyes on a train? Stand by." She walked to the RV's window and met a driver doing math with his eyes. 2 kids peered from bunks in the dark, faces bright with that sleepy excitement the night sometimes gives. Naomi kept her tone warm. "That clearance is real," she said, pointing up. "Take the truck route and you'll be around in 3 minutes." "We're 11. 6 with the trailer," the driver said, too hopeful to be sure. "The book says we clear. Books don't go under bridges," Naomi said, smiling. "We do. Let's make it the easy way." He nodded, grateful to have the decision taken from him. She stepped back, raised a palm without hurry, and added a small hold motion she didn't bother to explain. Somewhere beyond the trees, the faint clack-clack of steel on steel began, not loud, but undeniable axle count on a rhythm, a freight working a grade you couldn't feel from the road. The bridge over the road hummed the way big things hum when weight asks them a serious question. The railroad span dipped by something less than an inch, more than none. If you weren't waiting for it, you'd miss it. Naomi didn't miss it. Neither did the old paint on the bottom flange, which wore a shallow arch of scuffs where impatient roofs from other nights had kissed it and learned. The beacons stayed red, then eased to dark as the freight eased past. Naomi held her hand up until the last axle whispered over, then made a big circle with her arm toward the truck route. The RV rolled away with the kind of relief that doesn't know its own size. Behind it, a step van had crept to the line without her noticing, driver's side window open, the kind of neighborhood delivery rig that doesn't usually keep highway hours. The driver pointed at the sign with a laugh at himself. "I thought they took those clangers down," he said. "They did," she said, "except when they don't." She pointed him after the RV. The voice slipped into her ear again, no louder than before. "Count 7, it said. Pleasant, patient. She did because the night had offered her one good piece of advice. And it cost nothing to be polite. On 7, a low trailer appeared from the far side. Head on to the bridge. Its driver committed to the underpass, with the blind certainty of someone who'd made this run at noon, and thought night would be the same. Naomi stepped to the center line, lifted both hands, and let calm be a wall. The driver saw a person instead of a sign, and stopped the way people stop for people when the instruction is kind and firm. "Truck route's open," she said, pointing. He followed, sheepish, more relieved than embarrassed. On the bridge above, a final pair of axles tapped the rail like a polite goodbye. "Dispatch," she said. "Update, freight just crossed. Overheight system tripped correctly for load. Hold my mile while I clear." "Copy," dispatch said. "Dot is saying the overheight sensor is tied to the rail strain gauge only during night mode. But they also say it's been offline for months." A pause. Paper rustling in the background of her headset. "Do you have a guardian angel on 605 hertz? "Maybe," Naomi said. It wasn't a joke. She walked under the bridge and let her light skim the bottom flange. The paint told a quiet history of near misses. Pale arcs, shallow as pencil marks. Along the shoulder, something caught the beam, a short length of yellow-painted chain link, clean at one end where a pin had sheared long ago. She rolled it in her palm. It smelled like old rain and iron. She set it on the concrete abutment because that felt right, as if you return a tool to wherever a place keeps tools now. Her phone buzzed. A text from a DOT night tech she knew. "Overheight offline. Is budget speak." Rail still talks to our box. If you heard a voice, it wasn't ours. Good catches. She stayed a while. One more box truck came, blinking at the beacons like a student who needed the problem stated twice. She held them for the ghost of another axle that didn't arrive and waved them around. The night took a breath. The creosote smell went calm again. A barred owl down in the cottonwoods decided to practice the low part of its song and got it right on the second try. On the way back to the pullout, Naomi tuned the cruiser's AM radio down through the quiet. Between stations, a hum lived. Above it, so faint she might have imagined it, if the last 10 minutes hadn't made imagination unnecessary, a line of words seemed to ride the static. Measure from the road, not from the paint. She listened as if to a seashell pressed to her ear, heard nothing more, and let the dial spin home. Her report was clean. Overheight beacons activated. Freight crossing observed. 3 vehicles redirected. No contact, no collision. She left out the part about counting to 7 because it sounded like the kind of detail you save for when the coffee's hot and the room is filled with people who drive at night for a living. In the morning, a DOT crew would say the rail had a little more sway when the night went cool, that the sensors read it, that everything had worked. She would agree and still slow there on nights when the air smelled like creosote and iron and something old that liked the work. Story number 9. The rest area at mile 403 sat black behind a chain-link fence and a row of orange barrels. A state sign on the shoulder, bolted at an angle the wind had slowly encouraged, read closed for renovation, no services. Beyond it, the empty picnic shelters made a little skyline in the starlight, and a low-maintenance shed kept watch over a pet area that hadn't seen footprints since spring. Officer Mara Kincaid liked that turnout anyway. From the pull-through, she could see a long swath of interstate in both directions, both on-ramps and the soft silhouette of foothills where deer came down to graze when the night told them nobody was watching. Her cruiser idled on low, the console throwing its familiar green across the cabin. The radio had been quiet long enough to feel kind. At 2:41, the path lights inside the fence woke. They weren't connected to anything modern, just a run of old bollards with frosted lenses that had been dark since the day crews cut the feed. But tonight they tipped their caps one by one, the way lights do in old movies. The first by the restroom door winked on, then the next, and then the next, a line of soft white all the way to the outbound ramp. It wasn't bright. It was an invitation written in a whisper. Mara tipped her mic. District 7, Sierra 5, 3 at 403 East. Rest area is supposed closed. I've got interior path lighting active. Copy, Sierra 5-3, dispatch said, alert sliding back into the voice. Utilities show power off. You got a truck in there? Negative, she said, scanning the fence line. Nothing moved inside. On the highway itself, 2 semis drifted past at a courteous speed, their running lights quiet as a thought. Her AM radio left parked on the highway advisory frequency, mostly out of habit, found a tone, soft and clear, as if a door had been opened in some other room. Mesa Vista Rest Area Advisory, a calm voice said. The kind that knew how to talk people away from trouble. Please remain in the turnout for 90 seconds. Wildlife crossing ahead. Mara watched the screen where her own digits lived. 2:40. 1 rolled to 42. She glanced at the outbound ramp, then at the beat of lights along the path. It made a gentle spine that pointed, unmistakably, toward the ramp mouth. Headlights swung into the turnout. A minivan with bikes on the back, a nervous dog looking out the rear window. The driver slowed at the close sign, then, seeing her unit, rolled toward her with a small shrug of apology. She lifted a hand and pointed to a safe spot to park. He did, grateful to be told what to do. Behind him, a box truck blinked at the barrels and followed the minivan's lead, easing in with the guilty timing of someone who had missed the last services and knew better. Stay put, Mara said through the PA, warm more than stern. Just a minute. On the shoulder, the deer crossing sign yellow diamond with stylized antlers stood as it always had. On the hillside beyond the fence, brush moved without wind. She saw bodies then low and cautious, stepping in that elegant, deliberate way deer use when they are committed and watchful at once. A dozen, then more, resolving out of the slope like a photograph developing in a tray. Out on the lanes, a pair of fast cars came eastbound in company. Mara tapped her siren in a short, unscary chirp and eased the cruiser a foot deeper into the gore. A subtle block that made the oncoming stream read the road like a cautious sentence. Their taillights flicked. They settled. "Advisory," the voice said again, as cheerful as a Sunday usher. "Hold 2 minutes. Keep lights on." "Thank you." "Dispatch," Mara said. "Do we have a wildlife detection system at 403? Advisory radio just called a crossing." "Negative on active systems," dispatch said, paper whispering in the background like someone paging a manual. "Dot shows the old thermal sensors removed last year. Our trailer for that mile is in storage. You got a source?" "Affirmative," she said, not sure who she was answering. The deer came in a thread. They did not bolt. They did not dash. They moved as a unit at the pace caution chooses. The lead doe stepped onto the outbound ramp first, pausing with the patient intelligence of an animal who has walked the world and found many edges. One step, then another. The path lights made pale halos along the concrete as if lighting a stage. The small sound of hooves on pavement came across the fence, like a person tapping a tabletop with fingertips. A third vehicle nosed into the turnout without committing, an older sedan whose driver wore the set expression of someone who would appreciate a rule. Mara gave him one. "Palm out." Then a little circle in the air that meant we wait together. The driver nodded and turned his engine off. The quiet grew larger, then gentled as the highway let a gap open of its own accord. The line of deer crossed the outbound ramp, then the gore, then the slow lane, lifting and lowering in measured arcs. Eastbound headlights made them momentarily gold. Westbound taillights made them momentarily red. Nobody blew a horn. Nobody carried on. Even the box truck driver leaned forward with the respectful posture of an audience. Mara held one hand up to the minivan without looking back. With the other, she flicked her alley light to paint the area not with panic but with clarity. The last fawn late, dizzied by decision, then brave, trotted to catch up, legs crisp and precise, and the herd flowed down the far slope and disappeared back into brush that closed behind them as if it had been waiting. The path lights winked segment by segment toward dark, like a string of candles being pinched out. The advisory voice gave a final line so soft it sounded like courtesy more than instruction. "Thanks, folks." "Dispatch," Mara said. "Crossing complete. No contact. No near misses." "Copy," dispatch said. Night Tech just texted. "Rest area panel still shows dead. He also says you shouldn't be hearing anything." His exact words are, "Wildlife corridors on paper only now." Mara put the cruiser in park and stepped out to the fence gate, the one with the padlock that daylight crews used when they had to mow. Tonight it was latched, not locked. She pushed it open, boots soft on the gravel, and walked along the line of extinguished bollards. Up close, their lenses were clouded by sun, their bases tagged in marker by a teenager who'd run out of letters. She touched one with 2 fingers. The plastic was cool. When she moved her hand away, a little square of light rose inside and then ebbed, like breath on glass. The maintenance shed door was shut with a hasp and a promise. On its cinderblock wall, a paper notice under cloudy tape had curled at 2 corners. She smoothed it with her palm. In thick marker it read, "When deer are moving, leave paths on. Mendel, caretaker." In smaller letters below, someone had added, "Sundown to sunup in fall, sometimes spring. Count 90. She stood there a minute, letting the night lay its hand on her shoulder. The dog in the minivan whined once and then sighed, deciding the world had resumed its familiarity. The box truck driver pulled a thermos and took a sip like a toast. The sedan driver gave her a thumbs up. She answered with a nod. By the time the sky admitted the first hint of gray, the rest area looked like itself again. A closed place, patient in its waiting. Mara put the gate back the way she'd found it and set her cruiser nose toward the ramp. Before she went, she tuned the advisory frequency down and then up, listening for the hum. It was all static and weather, nothing shaped like words. She wrote the clean version, the one that fits forms. Temporary hold at closed turnout. Wildlife crossing. Motorist delayed 90 seconds. No incidents. Later, when coffee warmed the room at briefing and someone asked if anything interesting had happened, she said there'd been deer at 403 and the night had behaved itself. The older sergeant at the end of the table who'd started on this beat when the rest area had a custodian with a set of keys, and a broom smiled into his cup and said, "Mendel always did like his little shows." Budget decided the rest area's fate by winter. Reopen next year with new lights, fresh paint, modern cameras. In the meantime, on certain nights when the air came down from the foothills with the smell of sage and damp earth, Mara would ease into the turnout at 41 or 12 or the shabby midpoint between. If the bollards woke, she'd wait. If they didn't, she'd still give the slope the courtesy of a minute. Most nights nothing happened at all, and that was the good outcome. On the few when ears caught a careful click and brush leaned, a line of lives crossed where light politely offered to help, and nobody had to invent a miracle because the road had remembered its manners. And that was 9 true, disturbing stories from the dark highways. Strange encounters, chilling moments, and the echoes of nights that never quite end. Thank you for joining me here at the Sleep Haunt. Before you drift off, don't forget to share your city and the time you're listening. I love seeing where these stories travel. For now, close your eyes, let the road grow quiet, and rest easy. Good night.